Chapter 1073. This, Ronan was a little incoherent, Krasus was extremely excited, and even Lord Howl was a little embarrassed. Vanessa quietly took a step to the left and hid behind Duque, deliberately letting all the glory fall on Duque. Only Duque, the one and only Duque in the world, calmly accepted all of this under Tyron's surprised gaze. Duque did not think that there was anything wrong with this. After all, in the game, he was the man who had killed the true god Thun and held the chicken drumstick Atish. This was a habit that transmigrators naturally developed, and when faced with a grand occasion, it seemed more imposing and imposing. This was a gift from a true god and 4 demigods. Tyron covered her mouth in shock. Duque did not know that because of his unintentional action, Elun and the 4 dragon kings had a higher opinion of Duque. After all, if Duque was the kind of person who relied purely on scheming to ruin the Burning Legion, he would not be worthy of their heartfelt respect. But if he was a true hero who dared to bet his life and soul, fight for the world, and suffer all kinds of humiliation to finally drive away the enemy, it was a completely different matter. An existence with this kind of spirit was worthy of being worshipped by everyone no matter where they went. Phew. Elun admired Duque very much. After letting out a light breath, she said in a very calm tone, "The other beings in the world of Azeroth and I would like to know what happened in the Twisted Nether. My child Tyrant will not hide anything from me. But we would like to know the process from your point of view." Duque tilted his head slightly. "Let me be clear. I am referring to you letting go of part of your spiritual world, and not just repeating it verbally. We have no intention of prying into your privacy, and we also know that this is very rude. In exchange, you can also state your request in advance, and we will do our best to satisfy you." Alexstrasza also chimed in. "Please do not treat this as a transaction. As a token of appreciation for your help in Azeroth, we have prepared a big gift for you. Let me stress that this is a friendly exchange. It's just that if you're willing to show us your memories, we'll give you more generous gifts. If you agree, we can give you as much as we can." As soon as she finished speaking, the 4 dragon kings took out the gifts they had secretly prepared and placed them on their palms. Every item was priceless. There were equipment and tools. For example, the Red Dragon Queen pulled out a translucent, illusory list for Duque to choose from. "I agree," Duque replied. "But before that, I would like to change my request to everyone." The moonlight avatar of Elun made a "please" gesture. "Lady Alexstrasza, I want your life blessing. Bestow upon the 5 of us that we can control with our own will and possess powerful regenerative abilities." "Sure. Master Maligos, I want copies of all the magic manuscripts of the 5 elements: fire, frost, arcane, light, and darkness." "Yes. Sir Isra, I want to construct the principles and tactics of the dream world." "No problem. Sir Nozdormu, I want a..." At this point, Duque suddenly switched to the Draconic language, which was even more ancient. This shocked everyone present. Nozdormu nodded. "Lastly, Goddess Elun. My request will be made after I show you my memories." With that, Duque opened up his mind and showed Elun and the 4 dragon kings what he had seen and heard in Azeroth 10,000 years ago. However, Duque cleverly divided his mind into layers. He only showed them what they wanted to know on the outermost layer. Everything that involved his privacy was blurry and dark. There wasn't even any sound. Tyrant, who was standing behind Duke, had also entered the dreamscape that Isra had created for her. She watched the video, and her heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally calmed down. If even the bits and pieces of that ridiculous period were shown without reservation, it would be a shameful play and the cruelest public execution. If this was shown, Tyrant would probably have no choice but to commit suicide. Duque's display also made the few big shots in Azeroth smile bitterly. They began to understand why Duque could actually hide from those demons who were good at playing with people's hearts and prying into their souls. Of course, they understood what they wanted to know, but they didn't miss out on anything else. In order to trick the Burning Legion, Elun did not hesitate to lose a high priest. Now it seemed that Elun had profited greatly from this matter. Of course, the temporary death of her husband, Malorn, was another matter. In the dream world outside of Duque's perception, Elun, the 4 dragon kings, and the demigod Cenarius, who had not made it back in time, were having a small meeting. Can it be trusted? Malygos asked impatiently. Among so many big shots, he was the one who suffered the most. Not only did he hate Nesario, but he also hated the Burning Legion. At this point in time, he was already so paranoid that he was going crazy. When he had the time to go find his recently dead wife, Syndagosa, and touch her resentment, he should have fallen into madness just like in history. 5 billion demons. 450 void lords. Such an exaggerated battle record, I almost thought it was fake. Nozdormu smiled bitterly. Duque's system Elf's detection was the best in terms of the living, but in terms of detecting spirits, it was inferior to these gods and demigods. He also didn't know that he had done such an exaggerated job. Hee. Did you guys sense Sardraza's unwilling while wandering outside the planet's space barrier? Alexstrasza laughed. It's true. Elun made the final decision, and the other demigods no longer had any objections. After leaving the Dream World conference room, Elun immediately announced the results. Not to mention Ronan and the others, even Duque was dumbfounded when he heard this number. That much? Isra, who had his eyes closed, broadcast the voice of the soul that was wandering in outer space. It was President Sardraza's roar. Infernal affairs. You bastard. I won't let you go. Don't let me catch you. The boring threat behind was cut off by Isra. Isra smiled. How is it? Mr. Dukong, do you need protection? Azeroth welcomes you. Elun let out a long sigh of relief. Such a huge loss, the Burning Legion will not dare to come for at least 10,000 years. Well done. Mr. Dukong. Please tell me how you want me to reward you. Chapter 1074. Duque looked up at Elun. First, please help me cleanse the toxins in my body, as well as the contaminants in my soul. Dark energy. Darkness. 7 sins. None of them were easy to deal with. These powers were like drugs. Once touched, there would be no good ending. Especially the impurities in the soul. If there was no way to get rid of them, they would unknowingly fall into destruction and depravity. Duke didn't want to go overboard and become the villain. After all, he had personally blocked the path of the Burning Legion. Being a villain in Azeroth didn't have a good ending. Elun's blurry face showed a look of relief. The next second, a miracle descended from the sky. Countless night elves saw the bright moonlight that descended during the day, and knelt down to worship, chanting the name of the goddess of Elun. The gentle moonlight seeped into Duque's skin and entered his body through his pores. It then gathered in his meridians, forming a seemingly gentle but actually turbulent current. It began to cleanse the impurities and evil substances in Duque's body. Blarg. Duque suddenly made a retching motion. Tyrande was quick to react. She quickly pulled the silver basin from the statue in the hall and placed it in front of Duque. Duque could no longer control himself and vomited. Blarg. Blarg. It was as if he was vomiting sesame paste. Not just from his mouth, but from his nose and eye sockets as well. Black substances were also gushing out. That feeling of suffocation was 100 times worse than vomiting after drinking too much. Duque knelt down on the spot. Tyrande held the basin in one hand and patted Duque's back with the other to make Duque more comfortable. It was a terrible feeling. Not only was his body hollowed out, but the evil impurities hidden in his bones and soul were all forcibly extracted. It was very painful, but after extracting the dark matter, he felt as if his bones had become lighter, and he felt as if he was floating in the air. Elun smiled. Go and rest for the night. Tomorrow, I'll help you convert the dark power in your body into the power of the shadow. Darkness and shadow might seem similar, but in reality, they were completely different in nature. Darkness symbolized evil and destruction. Shadow was merely a byproduct of light. Where there is light, there is shadow. Where there is day, there is night. Even the power of Alun, the moon goddess, essentially belonged to shades. This was because moonlight was merely the refraction of sunlight in the dark night. When Duque finally finished vomiting, he panted heavily and thanked him. "Thank you so much." Tyrant helped Duque down to rest. When Duque came back to his senses, he found himself in Tyrant's room. Looking around, it was simple and tidy. Apart from Alun's totem, it was filled with a scholarly aura. Tyrant fetched a tray of water and removed Duque's clothes. She then used the water and a cleansing spell to clean the dirt on Duque's face and body. For the sake of convenience, she even took off her priestess's robe. Duque suddenly said, "Will there be any gossip in your room? After all, you are the high priestess." Tyrant's face, which always carried a holy aura, was filled with a faint smile. "You say it as if you have not done anything to me." Ugh! The room suddenly fell into a silence that made Duque's balls ache. He suddenly smiled bitterly. Although before returning to the War of the Ancients 10,000 years ago, Duque had already noticed that Tyrande was acting strangely. She did not choose Malfurion as she did in the original history. Instead, she maintained a strange relationship with the Stormwind brothers, more than friends but not lovers. But Duque did not expect himself to be so thorough. He did not even give the Stormwind brothers a single chance. He did not know how Tyrande's enmity towards him 10,000 years later came about. He also did not know if what he was doing now was what he had once done to Tyrande in the original timeline 10,000 years later. In any case, it was now a bad debt. Sigh. When he was a spy, he would be exposed at any moment. He did not have the time to think about how to deal with their relationship in the future. Now that he had dealt with the Burning Legion, his nervousness and fear had subsided. How to deal with his relationship with Tyrande had become a huge problem. According to his agreement with Nozdormu, as long as the Burning Legion was defeated like in history, he would activate the teleportation portal within 3 days and send the transmigrators who were still alive back to 10,000 years in the future. Don't even think about bringing any living beings back. Nozdormu had repeatedly emphasized before he left. Duque bared his teeth. What should he do now? Just as Duque's thoughts were running wild, he suddenly felt a wave of sourness. Ugh! Duque was shocked to find that Tyrande had already started to attack Duque. No. You can't. Why? Tyrande raised her head and stared at Duque, her pure face blushing. Bastard. I didn't want to learn all this, but you forced me to. I'm just returning what you taught me to you. Teacher, her voice was long, like the pout of a young girl. It sounded soft and numb. Duque didn't have much moral integrity now, and after hearing these words, his brain directly crashed. Duque grinned maliciously, and directly began to turn from defense to offense, climbing Shanghajar Peak. He. If I don't teach you a lesson, you might really forget the days when you were controlled by my sword. Come. Let's fight. Humph, it was obvious that Tyrande had sensed that Duque was about to leave. She fought back fiercely and tried to find a way to counterattack. Unfortunately, she was still too inexperienced. She was defeated by Duque's sword within 300 moves. The sky brightened. When Duque got up, Tyrande's back was facing him, but her shoulders were trembling. Are you not going to say anything to me? Can't you just give me a title before leaving? Duque did not know how to answer. After thinking for a while, he threw Nozdormu's warning into the twisting nether. If I continue to stay here, my body and soul might collapse. The next moment, Tyrande was already in Duque's arms. She rubbed her tear-stained face against Duque's chest. Will you come back? Duque could not bear to see her like this. If you are willing to wait for 10,000 years, after Duque said this, he felt that it was a shameful joke. Time and distance were the scariest poisons in the world of love. Before he had transmigrated, he had seen countless couples break up in less than a month. Furthermore, his relationship with Tyrande was not based on pure love. He did not know what Tyrande would think of him 10,000 years later. Was she enlightened? Had her love turned into hate? Was she filled with resentment? Or was it something else? He could not guess. Chapter 1075. Compared to the thousands of years of relationship he had with the Stormrage brothers, Duque's 1 month with Tyrande was like an instant. Expecting Tyrande to wait for him for 10,000 years? What was this? Back then, Alucia had waited for him for 10 years, and he felt that it was a miracle. If miracles could happen so casually, it would not be a miracle. 10,000 years was the lifetime of most night elves, even for the long-lived night elves. Duque could not possibly tell them that they would obtain a new well of eternity, and that the world tree Nordrassil would ensure their eternal youth until the Battle of Mount Hyjal, right? 10,000 years sounded more like an eternal farewell. But Duque could not explain it. No, actually, Duque wanted to explain, but when he opened his mouth, he found that his throat was stuck by an invisible force. The system concluded that it was the power of time. Had Nozdormu regained control of time and space after 15 years in the Dark Portal? Bastard. Why did he come at this time? Why did he come at this time? Duque was furious. Clear tears gushed out from her eyes, converging into a small stream that slid down her elegant and pure face. What a long time. 3,600,000 lonely nights. Was it self-mockery? A bitter smile? Heartache? Or despair? Looking at Tyrande's face, Duque felt heartache for the first time. If he lost the 3 Windrunner sisters, Alucia, or Jaina, he would probably feel the same way. Suddenly, he smiled bitterly. Duque decided to cheat. He first shook something, which Tyrande recognized. It was what Duque had asked for from Nozdormu. Then, she turned into her shadow form, and as if she was caressing it, she gestured on the white bedsheet. The black light did not disappear in an instant. Instead, it left behind an illusion of a black door that lasted for a full 3 seconds. Finally, Duque shrugged, as if to say, I don't care if you believe it or not, I believe it. Tyrande was stunned at first, but then she seemed to understand. Duque did not know if she really understood or if she only half understood. What greeted him was a rain of kisses and a passion that was even hotter than fire. After the passion subsided, there was sorrow that could not be dissolved. Tyrande muttered unconsciously, You despicable bastard, you turned me into this. 10,000 years is such a long time, how am I supposed to live alone? What if one day I suddenly really want to, what should I do? He happened to see a few bananas on a fruit platter not far away from him. Duque's bad taste suddenly flared up again. Why is it, again? Alright, please don't mind these details. Duque unsheathed the Duque divine sword and showed Tyrande a spell. Alright, please learn this spell. The spell was very simple. It was a variant of evocation magic. Tyrande was now a combination of a priestess and a hunter. This level of magic was nothing to her. The key was the effect of the spell. That bastard Duque had instantly shaped the bananas into the shape of the Duque divine sword. He used it as soon as he said it. Tyrande almost broke down on the spot. You. She could not continue after saying the word, you, 3 times. Very well, my student, please do your best to learn the most important spell that I will teach you. Duke earnestly instructed. Wu, first, you have to restore its appearance. Then its strength and toughness. Finally, you have to restore its domineering characteristics. Think about it. Those terrifying days when you were dominated by the divine sword. Teacher Duque sang loudly. Tyrande's face was so red that it seemed as if blood would drip from it. But, she still learned it seriously under Teacher Duque's coercion. After settling everything, Duque stood on the balcony. His naughty face faced the sky at a 45-degree angle, and a tear rolled down his cheek. Teacher Duque praised himself in his heart. Don't blame me. If you want to blame someone, blame me. As a restorer of history, I have to accurately restore history on the shoulders of the Lord of Time, Nozdormu. All right. My last historical restoration mission in this era, air-dried banana, has been completed. Behind him, Tyrant seemed to have sensed something and roared, "Du Kong, you bastard." In the morning, he once again went to the moon goddess's temple. This time, Alun met Duque alone. Tyrant was the only one by his side. The moonlight once again appeared in the day, gently nourishing every single magic circuit in Duque's body. Yesterday, after his body had been cleansed of the impurities, it was not that obvious. Today, with the power of the moon goddess, Duque was pleasantly surprised to confirm that the curse that bastard Archimond had given him had finally been removed. As expected, the curse of a demigod demon was best dealt with by a true god. Duque gently raised his hand, and a dozen elemental light orbs flew out of his palm. The 3 arcane energy orbs of fire, ice, and arcane magic disintegrated, reassembled, and disintegrated again in midair. Duque's mastery of elemental energy left Tyrant dumbfounded. "So you're a mage?" "Ha ha ha. Sorry. I was injured and cursed, and my magic circuits were thrown into chaos. My abilities as a mage were completely sealed. Thank you, Goddess Alun, for your help. Without you, I would have been a priestess for the rest of my life." "Humph. Isn't being a priestess good?" Tyrant was a little petulant. Not really. Do I have to tell you that every healer in my world has the heart to deal damage?" Alun looked at Tyrant, who was like her own child, teasing Duque, and suddenly felt very comforted. If she forced Tyrant to sacrifice herself and ended up with a bad ending, she would never forgive herself. At that time, she had lost all hope and used her precious divine power to protect Tyrant. Fortunately, this man called Du Kong had appeared out of nowhere. She knew a lot about Tyrant and the Stormrage brothers. But there was no other way. This was the best outcome. It was just that Tyrant would probably have to suffer. Duque and Tyrant also realized that they had gone too far. After fooling around for a while, they regained their composure. Alun continued, 4 of the items you obtain from Sargeras cannot be converted. They will bring you the deepest depravity. Then please destroy them for me, goddess." But Duque's heart was itching. It wasn't easy to get equipment from Sargeras, but most of them couldn't be used. "Alright, I remember that there were 5 boxes in total." Alun's blurry avatar smiled. "Thank goodness. And this one is the most compatible with my attributes. I can handle it for you." Duque looked at it, and his heart almost flew out of his chest. Moonlight Chalice. Chapter 1076. The Moonlight Holy Grail wasn't very famous among the players, but that wasn't the point. The point is, all you need to know is that it came from Sargeras. In the future, it would be brought into Sargeras' tomb, and could only be obtained from the Moon Sisters. In essence, this was an accessory for healers. However, after being personally adjusted by the Moon Goddess, Alun, its attributes had changed greatly. The basic attribute of the entire accessory was intelligence, but it was a ridiculously high intelligence bonus. How high was it? For a Radiant Moon Wizard, it was about 1,000 stories tall. Even Duke, a Breaking Dawn Archmage, was forcibly raised to the level of a rank 3 Breaking Dawn after enjoying the additional magic circuits. He wasn't even at the peak. Duque absolutely believed that this item, which should have only appeared after the 7th version of the game, would definitely last him until he reached the demigod stage. Apart from the intelligence bonus, the special effect of the Moonlight Holy Grail was also very amazing. When activated, it would grant haste in the day and critical strike at night. What an interesting piece of equipment. Duke, who had originally come to the ancient war with the intention of working to repay his debt of gratitude, was truly overjoyed. "Ha ha ha. Thank you, Goddess Alun." "Thank you." Duque bowed 3 times in a row in a rare moment of obedience. Compared to Shaman's huge gift bag, Jaden's gift was only average and within expectations. Even so, Duque finally managed to gather a full set of equipment that should have been at the Sunwell Highlands level in the future. Paired with the Wings of Death and Shaman's Moonlight Holy Grail, he was armed to the teeth. Of course, Duque wouldn't neglect Tyrant, and gave her a set of priest equipment. Those who stepped into the realm of heroes were all very powerful. For example, Tyrande was a huntress and a priest, at the same time. In theory, she could wear chainmail like a hunter, but considering that her most lethal skill was the divine arts, her attire was more inclined towards cloth armor. In the War of the Ancients, many demon lords had been killed. Unfortunately, Ronan and the others were all fattened up on Mount Hyjal, and basically didn't care about them. In the end, only Krasis changed his equipment. The problem was that this guy was a dragon. Dragons were the race that hated equipment the most. Their own scales, claws, and dragon breath were their strongest equipment. 3 days after the end of the Primordial War, it was finally time to part. Whether it was Ronan, Krasis, Grom, Vanessa, or Duke himself, they all felt like they were in a trance. Not to be tolerated by the world. Does not exist in this world. The world was rejecting Duke and the others, rejecting them. The indescribable feeling of the heavens and earth pressing down on them made it hard for them to breathe. On the balcony of the Elun shrine, Elun's incarnation led Isra and a group of demigods, while Tyrande led Malfurion and a group of mortals. They stared at Duke and the other four. They had only known each other for a short period of time, but everyone knew that without these mysterious and powerful helpers from afar, this earth-shattering battle would have ended with the Burning Legion's complete victory. This was especially so for this mysterious Du Kang. As the core of the group of 6, he did not hesitate to disgrace himself by joining the Burning Legion, reversing the portal, destroying the Void Fortress in the twisting nether, and completely annihilating billions of demons. In one fell swoop, he established at least 10,000 years of peace in Azeroth. Until now, no one asked where the group of 6 came from. Everyone had a common goal, the Burning Legion. It was enough to understand this. Misty rays of light began to appear on the bodies of the remaining 5 people. It was as if a mysterious existence was using an eraser that could erase everything in the world to gently erase their majestic figures. Starting from their hands and feet, signs of disintegration began to appear. Alexstrasza and Isra simultaneously looked at Nozdormu, who was silent, as if they had seen through everything. Tyrande stood at the front of the group, her hands clasped tightly between the 2 Mount Hyjal peaks. This was the only way she could feel her intense heartbeat through her fingers. For the past 2 days, she had made use of every minute and second to be with Duque. She completely ignored everything else around her, including the Stormwind brothers' gazes. Before the final moment arrived, she had said all that needed to be said, and done all that needed to be done. She did not want to say goodbye. Even though she knew that the outcome could not be changed, she still could not control her emotions. At this moment, Elun's incarnation gave Tyrande a light push. Go. My child. Without hesitation, Tyrande pounced forward, but when she opened her arms and crossed them, all she could see was an illusion. The last thing she saw was a face that only she could see, a face with a bitter smile. Oh. This was Du Kang's true appearance. He was not as bad as she had imagined, nor was he very handsome, but he was very much like you. Tyrande knelt on the ground, her entire body filled with melancholy and reluctance. Unbeknownst to her, everyone had already left. No matter how conflicted the Stormwind brothers were, they could only look at Tyrande's back, which seemed to be trembling from crying, and left with a long sigh. Only she and Elun's incarnation were left on the balcony. Child. Have you thought it through? This is 10,000 years of loneliness. As long as you are willing to turn back. Tyrande suddenly stood up. Her blue hair danced in the wind, and she gently combed it with her fingers. Feeling the aura of fate flowing in the wind, her long and elegant silver eyes seemed to see through time and space, seeing 10,000 years in the future. Tyrande suddenly smiled. Perhaps, my first encounter with him was definitely a prank by the goddess of fate. But don't you think that my 10,000 years of loneliness in exchange for 10,000 years of peace in Azeroth is too worth it? Child, Tyrande suddenly turned back, her beautiful face filled with determination. At first, I was helpless. But later, that was my choice. Since I chose a great hero who could fight against the Burning Legion. Humph. A mere 10,000 years is nothing. Was it anger? Self-mockery? Perseverance? Or stubbornness? Not to mention Alun, even Tyrant herself did not know if she could really persevere with this slightly twisted emotion for 10,000 years. On the other side, Duque returned, also with melancholy. Perhaps, after the War of the Ancients, history would develop like the original version. For example, Illidan would once again build the Well of Eternity, and then the world tree Nordrassil would be planted, followed by the Naga's reproduction and revenge. But Duque was thinking about something else. The figures of the five turned into streams of light, traveling at high speed in the long river of history. At this moment, a ray of bronze light suddenly crashed into Duque. This scene was so inconceivable. It was as if a sharpshooter had shot a flying arrow from the opposite side in a manner that allowed him to reach his target first. The bronze light knocked Duque out of the fixed space-time orbit. Chapter 1077. Duque. Master? Beast Duke? The remaining four members of the history revisionists all cried out in shock. However, their cries were of no use. They were still wrapped in Nosdormu's power as they sped toward the end of the river of time. What's going on? I don't know. Isn't Nosdormu's power protecting us? Damn it. The bronze dragon isn't reliable at all. There was a lot of discussion, but no one could do anything. This wasn't their domain. Other than pointlessly waving their arms, they couldn't even draw their weapons, let alone launch an effective attack. Nosdormu's mysterious power isolated them from the outside world. Apart from seeing, speaking, and listening, they couldn't do anything. The power that collided with Duque seemed to be bronze too, right? Krasus asked. Ronan frowned. Did Nosdormu suddenly give Master a new mission? Vanessa was furious. That's not how you order people around. Grom hammered his thigh. Bastard. Then Lord Roar fell silent. No one knew who he was cursing or what he was cursing at. At this moment, in the void of the time crevice far behind the four of them, Duke was staring at a huge bronze dragon in the air. Hello. Duke Marcus. I am Andam, a subordinate of His Majesty Nosdormu. The bronze dragon lowered his head slightly to show his respect. Oh. Duke didn't even lift his eyelids, as if he was in a half-awake state as he sized up this huge bronze dragon. I'm sorry to interrupt your return. There's an emergency. Time and space are in disorder again. His Majesty's command, you, Duke Marcus, are to head to the point of disorder immediately. Help the founding Emperor Soridon and the High Elves defeat the Trolls during the Troll War 2,800 years ago in your original timeline. Help him build the Arathor Empire. With that, a green light flashed in Andam's hand. A magic scroll appeared in his claws, and he handed it to Duque. It was clearly an order. Duque frowned. Let me have a look. Yes, the situation is urgent, so there's no time to explain. Please take a look at the order book for the specifics. I'll open the time passage to the Troll War right away. Then, after seeing Duque take the scroll, Andam began to cast a spell. His dragon claws, which only had 3 fingers, cooperated with the spell and made all kinds of complicated gestures. Soon, a hazy and illusory portal was about to form. At this moment, without any sign or reason, a thin golden sword pierced through the gap between the scales on Andam's back. It extended to the length of a spear and came out of Andam's chest. Andam let out a shrill roar and swung his tail at the ambusher who had injured him. The dragon's tail, which was strong enough to shatter mountains, missed. He covered his chest with his left claw and twisted his neck. Only then did he see the ambusher, Duque. With Ice Queen in his left hand and Gandalf, the legendary sword of the white-robed sword saint, in his right, Duque had a mocking smile on his face and stared at Andam maliciously. Duke Marcus. How dare you hurt me? Do you know what you're doing? You're challenging His Majesty Nosdormu. Are you declaring war on the entire bronze dragon race? Andam roared. Duque was unmoved. Instead, he sneered. Pretend. Keep pretending. You're just a stupid eternal dragon, and you want to fool me? Andam's face suddenly darkened. No, his whole body began to turn black. The wounds on his body were healing at a high speed, and his body began to expand rapidly. In less than a second, his entire body doubled in size. As a mortal, Duke Marcus, you're amazing. You actually found out. Hoo. May I ask, how did you find out? In terms of appearance, Andam was still a bronze dragon, but his color had completely turned into a deep and terrifying ink black. Duque tilted his head. From the moment I was thrown into the twisting nether for no reason, I realized that someone wanted to kill me. And this guy is a super strong person with the power to interfere with the timeline. At first, I thought it was an ancient god, but then I locked my target on the eternal dragon body. Mortals don't know about us. Even Nozdormu doesn't know much about us. But I do. Duque interrupted Andam with unspeakable pride on his face. Yes, this was also the pride of a transmigrator. Ugh. As if choked to death, Andam laughed crazily. Stupid guy, do you think you can fight back? You have no chance. Idiot, look at what you have in your hand. Duque waved the magic scroll in his hand. You mean this thing? Sorry, the whispers inside are useless to me. This time, Andam's expression finally changed. Impossible. Duque's face was full of the smile of a victor. The whispers of the ancient gods are indeed powerful. But that's only for you silly dragons and other mortals. As for me. Hee. Really hee. Although Andam couldn't grasp the essence of the word hee, Duque's expression almost drove him crazy. That's right. That's the expression. Whether it's you eternal dragons or Sardras, I like to see you sad and indignant, and want to kill me, but can't do anything about it. Duque was smug. He also had the capital to be smug. There was nothing more satisfying than throwing the opponent into a trap that he had set himself after he had broken the game. The whispers of the ancient gods? Yes. It was indeed powerful. Unfortunately, the whispers had a prerequisite, and that was to directly affect the deep subconscious of the victim. But ever since Duque had infiltrated the Burning Legion, he had been dividing his spiritual sea into layers and using the system to simulate a seemingly independent spiritual world in the shallowest layer. And from beginning to end, Duque couldn't speak the language of this world. Almost everything needed to be translated by the system. After Duque's special instructions, the whispers of the ancient gods became like this: have you finished your homework? Your mom is actually an orc. Your dad something Marcus, found a Tauran as a mistress. Your brother Sal heard that I came back safely and decided to go to the temple to do a striptease. Heavens. I, Moke, am really good. Damn. Scared. Ah. Chapter 1078. By the way, what the hell was an eternal dragon? Why would the eternal dragons have the whispers of the ancient gods? This was a very long history. At first, when the Titan left Azeroth, he gave the 5 dragon aspects their own unique abilities, and at the same time, made them shoulder their respective responsibilities. For the bronze dragon, this responsibility was much more complicated than for the other dragons. They had to guard time and stick to the path of destiny. In the process of being the guardian of time, Nozdormu faced many dilemmas, and he eventually became the leader of the eternal dragons, forming a dragon legion that disturbed the timeline in various ways. So, what did this distant story have to do with Delano? 4 words, closely related. Delano's fate had long been tied to Azeroth. Although it was another planet, from the first day of the birth of this universe, these 2 worlds were inseparable, and they would depend on each other in the future. More importantly, Azeroth was not the first planet that the Titan had modified. The Titan traveled through countless worlds, each world being made into a unique piece of beautiful jade in its original form. However, all worlds had a common connection: time. When the leader of the Pantheon, Sardra's elder brother, the spouse of Ionar the Life-Giver, Amon Sel, the Creation Titan, gave Nozdormu the power of time, He also gave the bronze dragon a maxim: the great mission given to you is to maintain the purity of time. Know that there is only one true timeline, and you must protect it. If time does not flow in the established way, the consequences will be beyond your imagination. The structure of reality will fall apart. This is a heavy task, the foundation of all tasks in this world, because without time, there is no life. There was only one true timeline, not only for Azeroth, but also for the entire grand universe. So did parallel times exist? Of course. Moreover, the parallel time was constantly threatening to jump to the real timeline. If there was enough time power, a character could jump from a broken timeline to another time, and various effects would occur. For example, Sa was likely to be sold as a slave and then died in the arena. Another example was for Neltharion to pretend to be Lord Presto and successfully kill Tyreenus to become the leader of the Alliance. All of these characters exist, and all of them are living beings, some malevolent and terrifying, others noble and righteous, depending on the direction of their timeline. But the timeline they were in was not the real timeline, and their lives were not set. The bronze dragon, on the other hand, shuttled through the various timelines and cleaned up the time fragments created by the eternal dragon, so that these events would not affect the real world that Duque was currently in. This was the responsibility of Nozdormu and the bronze dragon. At first, when Nozdormu obtained the power to transcend time, he also knew how he would understand his life. Was this an unnecessary move? Of course not. This was to tell Nozdormu that even after obtaining the power of time, he would still reach the end, death. When there is life, there is death. When there is a beginning, there is an end. Everything is like this. As such, Nozdorm understood the need to protect the true timeline, as he could see what was happening in other timelines. However, in a certain timeline, Nozdormu was influenced by the whispers of the ancient gods, became Nozdor, and established the Eternal Dragon Army. The purpose of the Eternal Dragons was to change the fate of the world and destroy the real timeline, the timeline that Duque was in. Although Duke himself wasn't sure if the timeline he had transmigrated to was the real main timeline, but since ancient times, humans were mostly self-centered creatures. Didn't you see how Copernicus was burned at the stake for violating the geocentric theory? Since Duque had crossed into this timeline, maintaining this timeline as the main result had become one of Duque's duties. Although I, Duque, am also a guy who does not stop causing trouble is my privilege, okay? You eternal dragons who have been brainwashed by the ancient gods dare to say that you want to destroy the world that I have fought for and destroy my harem? Pfft! Who am I going to attack if not you? The eternal dragon who claimed to be Andam was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Perhaps he was Andam, but he could only be the brainwashed version of Andam in that collapsed timeline. He wanted to kill Duque. How could Duque not want to kill him? In the time gap above the river of time, an eternal dragon and a traveler started a life and death duel. In Duque's sight, Andam forcibly healed the wound on his chest that had just been pierced by Duque. Ha ha ha. Stupid mortal. Nozdormu's lackey, you don't understand the greatness of time and the power of time at all. All your damage is ineffective against me. Ha ha ha, Andam laughed wildly. Then, he was slapped in the face by Duque. Huh. I don't know why a certain eternal dragon used up 30% of the power in his body to turn time back to a time when he was not injured. Andam's laughter stopped abruptly, and there was clear fear on his extremely anthropomorphic face. Andam the eternal dragon, you can deceive idiots without common sense, but you can't deceive my eyes. Duque pointed at his eyes, but he was actually pointing at the system parameter display on his retina. There, Andam's HP bar was full again, but his blue bar had dropped by a full 30%. More importantly, the system determined that Andam's hostile level was not the undefeatable skeleton level, but the rare elite silver dragon level. The fattest thing in this world was, of course, the boss, but in the normal solo state, rare elites were also a good way to make a fortune. Humph. You know nothing about the battle in the realm of time. Andam roared, and it seemed to spit out a black flame behind him for no reason. Unexpectedly, Duque neither advanced nor retreated, and directly took 3 steps to the left. Something strange happened. The next moment, the black flame actually passed through Duque's left side. It looked like Duque had almost hit the dragon's breath, but he was actually unharmed. Impossible. How can a mortal see through it? Andam was so surprised that he almost bit his tongue off. Haha. Isn't it just the calculation of time and space? Duque looked at Andam as if he was a mentally handicapped child, which almost made Andam go crazy. The calculation of time and space was easy to say, and even many combat theories since ancient times were actually based on this theory. But in the long river of time, who could calculate as accurately as Duque, who had the system elf? Chapter 1079. In a primitive duel, the easiest way for one party to see the other with a weapon was to stab the weapon directly at the shortest distance. It took time to stab, and during this time, if the other party blocked, dodged, or otherwise nullified the attacker's attack, it would be a successful defense. This was the difficulty of fighting in the river of time. On the surface, there was no problem with a human and a dragon communicating verbally, but this was just an illusion caused by the time rift. They were actually separated from each other for a long time. This was not a matter of minutes or seconds. Often, if one dodged well, it could be a day, a month, or even a long time in units of time. Let's say, if the guy you're facing took a year to stab you, it would be a genius for him to be able to stab you in the same spot as you were. Under normal circumstances, if you were to be stabbed, you'd be a genius. This was the problem in the time rift. Both Duque and Andam were protected by the laws of time. Although Duque had the power of Nosdorm, the laws of time between them had to be judged according to the laws in the river of time. To hurt each other, one had to calculate the true time and distance between each other. It stood to reason that a mortal like Duque could not have this ability, which was why Andam refused to believe it. However, in the next moment, Duque slapped the eternal dragon in the face with practical action. Slap. A huge palm of arcane energy slapped Andam's dragon face. This was not just a simple slap in the face. With the power of time in the river of time, the slap actually collapsed half of Andam's face. On Andam's long dragon mouth, the upper and lower lip muscles that covered the right dragon tooth were all slapped away. Strangely and terrifyingly, there was no blood splattering everywhere, and all the wounds turned into scabs in an instant. It could be clearly seen that many of the dragon teeth in Andam's right jaw had cracks, and then they gave off an ancient feeling. Finally, the teeth fell out. The eternal dragon's strong teeth were not destroyed by the impact, but old. Fall. Teeth. Duque's magic attack actually attracted the power of time, directly accelerating the decline and aging of the injured part. This time, Andam was afraid. He was truly afraid. He flapped his wings with all his might, striving to widen the time distance between him and Duque. At the same time, he shouted, Your true form is a bronze dragon. Bronze dragon? Chi. Duque sneered. At the same time, his feet did not stop. I'm not such a high-end existence. I'm Duque, a mortal, although ordinary but a little special. While smiling, Duque walked towards Andam at a seemingly slow pace. Only the eternal dragon, who also used time as a weapon, knew the horror of Duque. Every step he took seemed to be strolling leisurely, but he actually avoided every unstable node in the dimensional rift, and then stepped on a small tributary that could accelerate the flow of time. The principle behind this method of playing was no different from surfing, but the danger involved and the grasp of time were simply exquisite. Such a method was far superior to that of an eternal dragon born as a bronze dragon. No, it can't be, Andam shouted. Hee. Am I going to be killed by you like a target? Is that what you think makes sense? Duque snorted. While the two enemies spat at each other, their hands were unwavering. Andam blasted dozens of dragon breaths, as well as over 100 kinds of offensive spells that Duque knew or couldn't figure out at all, at Duque's head. In Andam's imagination, with Duque's weak vitality, just one hit would make him kneel. Fragile? Perhaps it was. Compared to the big, powerful lizards like the dragons, the human body was too fragile. In other words, because of the dragon's strong vitality, they could have many opportunities to make mistakes. Humans, however, could not. Many people would be frightened and cowardly in such a situation where they would die in one hit, and they would greatly lose their level. In the past, Duque was likely to be like this, but 15 years of experience had long turned Duque from a rookie who could not fight at all into a beast feared on the battlefield. Andam's attack seemed to be a storm, but Duke still looked like he was oblivious to everything and was playing with elegant micro-steps. Under his feet, there was a colorful light that condensed all the past historical fragments of the world. If he was not careful, he could fall into a certain period of history and never come out again. Either he would be integrated into that period of history, or he would be swallowed by that period of time and space, not even his bones would be left. In front of him was the violent and brutal destructive power that gathered all the killing intent of the eternal dragon. If he was hit by one, it would be enough to turn Duque into ashes and disappear from history forever. Even Nozdormu could not find a trace of this terrible attack. But Duque had a 100% dodge. No, no, no. Impossible. Andam screamed, but he could not stop Duque, who was holding a golden sword, from approaching him. Duque also fought back, and countless hands of magic appeared above the river of time, shooting into the void without any rhyme or reason. It seemed like a waste of magic power to shoot randomly, but when Andam tried to dodge Duque's frontal attack, he was shocked to find that those shots actually blocked his escape route. This should be impossible in the domain of the river of time, where the flow of time was not fixed and could even be said to be quite chaotic. This was like someone firing a shot 100 years ago, and the bullet flew unscientifically for 100 years before accurately hitting the enemy. It was simply absurd. Andam wanted to ignore this fact, but the constant pain coming from all over his body told him that all of Duque's attacks were real and not an illusion. He could indeed use special magic to heal his injuries, but unfortunately, both sides knew that this recovery ability was not endless. This form of recovery by reversing time consumed more magic power than the holy light recovery developed by humans and night elves. No, no, no. Andam screamed incessantly, constantly changing his attack methods in an attempt to hit Duque. Unfortunately, no matter what, it was as ridiculous as a mortal trying to chop a ghost to death with a kitchen knife. Unknowingly, Duque had arrived in front of Andam and stood still, his face full of sarcasm that made Andam look like he deserved a beating. It's over. Eat my meteor chi explosion. In the river of time, the golden sword light formed one gorgeous arc of light after another, incessantly cutting the eternal dragon's huge body. From the initial 100% recovery, to black blood splattering everywhere, and then to screams, 3 seconds later, when the 1024 sword slashes were finished, the river of time returned to deathly silence. Chapter 1080. Villains died because they talked too much, and righteous people died because they talked too much. Speaking of which, everything that Duque said before could be included in the scope of mental attacks. It wasn't until the system prompt said that the eternal dragon Andam from another timeline died that Duque breathed a sigh of relief. Damn, the Moonlight Holy Grail is too awesome. Duque suddenly discovered that because Gandalf, the legendary sword of the white-robed sword saint, was a rare and strange magic sword, it enjoyed the complete magic bonus, and the Moonlight Holy Grail was effective. And in this place where it was impossible to distinguish between day and night, the amazing Moonlight Holy Grail could trigger 2 special effects at the same time, spell haste and critical hit. What was even more incredible was that in this space where time could be compressed and extended infinitely, attack speed and critical hit damage could be stacked almost infinitely. This was the birth of the completely unreasonable 1024 sword strikes in 3 seconds. The eternal dragon was actually chopped by Duque's melee attack. Duque quickly searched Andam's body and quickly calmed down. He sensed Nozdorm's power and let himself fly back to the spacetime route that Nozdorm had set for him on the River of Time. In the end, Duque didn't have the ability to travel through time on his own. He could survive on the River of Time entirely because of Nozdorm's power. Here came the problem. As insurance, Nozdorm must have injected a lot of power into Duque in the process of sending him back to the modern world, but no matter how much it was, it wouldn't be double. According to the system's estimation, it was about 130%. However, in the space-time rift just now, even though Duke had played a beautiful wave-like subtle steps above the river of time and dodged 100%, he still consumed a lot of time power because he entered the space-time rift. Only 98% of the original energy is left? Duke narrowed his eyes. Yes. According to the calculation, assuming that he successfully returned to the original time point of the dark portal in 16 years, the energy needed was 100, and now Duke needed 98. Don't underestimate the 2% difference. The slightest difference could lead to a great difference. If Duke were to kneel, he would definitely kneel at these 2 percentage points. Looks like I can only count on this. Duke looked at the ball of unknown energy wrapped in arcane energy in his hand. System Elf, begin analysis. That was what he had obtained from killing Andam. It wasn't a gold coin or a piece of legendary equipment, but a mass of power. Duque felt a slight pain in his brain. It was the side effect of the system elf extracting Duque's memories at high speed. As an engineering university student, his knowledge of physics and astronomy was passable. When the system elf combined a large amount of modern knowledge with the power of time snatched from the eternal dragon, and put it together with the arcane archmage's deceleration tactic for analysis, a mysterious magic tactic barged into Duque's mind: time acceleration. Speed up? I can only use this bit of power once. Duque smiled bitterly. According to the original remaining power of time, Duque would obviously fall into the time period 16 years before the dark portal. Either he would go to a time point before his main body had transmigrated, or even worse, he would go to the world of Azeroth between the 1st and 16th years of the dark portal, where there was already a Duque. If the use of acceleration was too exaggerated and he went to a later time point, my Duque's kingdom would be finished. Damn it. I hate the eternal dragon the most. The second is Nozdormu. He can't even protect me through time, and he has the nerve to ask me to work for him. Bah. In the future, whoever wants to go can go, but don't ask me and my people to go. Although he was cursing, Duque had to restrain his mind and concentrate on the river of time. Through the time fragments that the system kept scanning, he confirmed where his end point was. When Duque saw the fragment of Thoradin the Great, Duque realized that it was a little close. Then, Duque saw the fragment of Aegwin dominating the world. Then, Aegwin beat up Sargeras, who was pretending to be a grandson. When Duque's retina showed that there was only 2% of the power of time left, Duque's spirit was lifted. Now is the time. Duque began to accelerate. Suddenly, he injected that small ball of power of Andam into the spacetime shield around him, and Duque's whole body burst out with a stronger stream of light. Like a comet falling into the atmosphere, Duque's whole body glowed, dragging a long tail of flames, and swept across the sky above the river of time. He saw the fragment of the opening of the dark portal, saw himself killing the Mediv possessed by Sargeras, saw the Alliance commander Duque sweeping through the horde, and saw him returning from the void to once again organize the Alliance to fight against the Scourge army. Finally, he saw his destination, 16 years of the dark portal. In front of him, it seemed that because Ronan and the others had just entered this part of the time node, Duque could still see the 4 small holes that had just been opened and not yet closed with the help of the system. Go in for me. Duque was too fast. Breaking into that point of time was like driving at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, stretching his hand out of the car window and using 2 fingers to pinch a strand of hair that was blown by the wind by the window. Other than Duke, who had the system elf, there was no one else who could do better than him in this kind of insanely precise operation. Even if Nozdorm's main body came over, he would at most be able to do this by pulling each other's strength, instead of crashing into it with insufficient strength like Duque. Duque did it. He had indeed met his goal. He succeeded. And failed. Because he had indeed hit the time bubble that represented the time he was at, but in the next instant, he was sent flying. On the 16 years of time bubble of the dark portal, a black power that clearly came from the eternal dragon was rejecting Duque's entry. King Hell, with the momentum, Duque's entire body continued to fly forward in the river of time. The only fortunate thing was that Duque's collision seemed to have finally attracted the attention of that bastard dragon, Nosdorm. Right on top of the huge time bubble, a huge bronze dragon claw reached out and attempted to grab Duque, who was flying forward at high speed. Nosdorm failed. He grabbed nothing. Although it was just a little bit off, it was still nothing. Nosdorm. You useless dragon king. I won't let you go even if I become a ghost. Duque was furious. Duque cried. Duque was in despair. However, at the very end, a sentence suddenly appeared from the system: analysis of spacetime anchor, tactic completed, found the nearest anchor point in front. Do you want to enter? Yes. Duque said decisively. Chapter 1081. The 16th year of the Dark Portal was destined to be a turbulent one. Before winter was over, the Alliance launched a large-scale attack on the Lordaeron continent and reclaimed Lordaeron, which had fallen and changed hands twice. On the 12th of August, the Alliance received a piece of bad news. Of the 6 powerhouses who participated in Nosdormu's secret operation, only 4 returned. The old beastman, Brock, died in battle. The tribe did not announce the exact cause of his death. They only announced that he died in the hands of the Burning Legion in a secret operation that could not be announced to the public. Thrall and Grom led the elders of the tribe to attend Brock's state funeral. The other was Duque, the former leader of the Alliance. Even though he was cursed by Kill Jaden, he forcefully reversed the curse and banished the power of darkness. He was a great hero who went missing in a secret mission. Although it was not the first time Duque went missing, his disappearance this time caused an even bigger uproar. Because the 4 survivors said that a bronze dragon stopped Duque, the reaction of several major countries in the Alliance was extremely intense. Queen Sylvanas of the Sin Dorii Kingdom. Queen Gianna of Kul Tiras. Queen Kalia of Lordaeron. The heroines of the Alliance, Aurelia and Sasha, as well as Alusia, who had great influence in the South Sea city-state, all sent the sternest questions to the bronze dragons. Nosdormu could ignore these mortal forces, but the problem was that his big sister, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, had personally come to his doorstep and almost destroyed his nest. Also, the moon goddess Elun had descended a few times. Nosdormu was getting a headache. Time passed day by day. Aurelia and the other women waited day by day, but they were disappointed every day. We should be at ease. Duque might have gone to that person to fool around. Aurelia smiled bitterly. Vanessa had already reported to her on the first day she returned. However, that person had a strange reaction as well. He firmly denied Aurelia and the others' indirect inquiries. However, the Alliance and the Night Elves weren't really allies. The 5 women of the Duque family couldn't find a better reason to bother them. In any case, the moon god shrine just dealt with them indifferently. In fact, the leader of a country was very busy. In this day and age, there wasn't a king who was lucky enough to be a human stamping machine. Every family has its own troubles. Sin, Dorii and Kul Tiras were busy rebuilding, and Alusia also needed to use the power of the South Sea city-state and the Marcus family's merchant fleet to help these 2 families. In the end, the only ones who were free were the Windrunner's eldest sister and 3rd sister. Tyrande would visit Aurelia or Sasha whenever she had the time. She didn't have the time to leave them hanging. The days of the Night Elves were really not good. On one hand, they had to provide disaster relief from the explosion of Mount Hyjal, and on the other hand, they had to face all kinds of threats. Sentries must be sent to the eastern Azhara to keep an eye on the new Naga and Satyrs. Although the South had once joined forces with the Horde to fight against the Burning Legion, the Horde's continuous requests for logging made the Night Elves very unhappy. In fact, in the Stonetalan Mountains, the 2 races also had border conflicts. On the western shore of the Black Sea, a large number of Night Elves who had lost their homes were waiting for ships to cross the sea. This was because in Teldrassil, Fandral Staghelm advocated to plant a 2nd world tree there. At the same time, he tried his best to negotiate with the Dragon's Slumber Shrine, attempting to get the 3 Dragon Kings to continue to give blessings like the World Tree, Nordrassil. In other words, the night elves would lose their eternal life and youth. Many elves felt a sense of crisis. In the northern Winterspring Valley, they were invaded by the undead who claimed to be the Forsaken. In the central Fellwood Forest and Grey Valley, the remaining demons of the Burning Legion were still doing evil. Tyrant's claim that they were busy was definitely reasonable. After being repeatedly rejected, Aurelia and her sister rarely came to Teldrassil. Time passed like this, and in the blink of an eye, it was the beginning of the 17th year of the Dark Portal. The construction of the Horde's main city, Orgrimmar, was announced. At the same time, the Horde's territory had expanded a lot. In the north, they basically reached the edge of the Night Elves' territory, and in the south, Theramore was also bordering Theramore. In view of this, after some discussion, the Alliance decided to agree to the peace treaty proposed by Thrall during the King's Conference when the Night Elves were still unwilling to accept the Alliance's olive branch. In June of the same year, as the new Alliance leader, Varian Wrynn, personally crossed the Endless Sea and came to Theramore to meet with Thrall to sign the peace treaty between the Alliance and the Horde. In the end, Varian unexpectedly disappeared, and when he came back, he was completely muddle-headed. The Alliance suspected that it was a conspiracy by the Horde, and there were even conspiracy theorists who directly accused the Horde's wizards and warlocks of doing this. Thrall could not defend himself, and the relationship between the Alliance and the Horde suddenly froze. Time continued to pass. Who knew how many days, months, or years had passed? Suddenly, a huge ripple appeared in the thick clouds in the night sky. A comet fell from the sky, streaking across the sky with a long tail of flames, and crashed into the surface of a huge lake. Boom! A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. The huge waves caused chaos on the beautiful shore of the lake. After a short but intense wave that was like a tsunami crashing into the shore, it was a mess everywhere. A human body that looked like a salted fish was washed to the shore. Am I dead? In a daze, the human body only saw a pair of white boots with golden embroidery standing in his blurry vision, and then he lost consciousness. After an unknown amount of time, Duque woke up. The moment he regained consciousness, Duque felt that something was wrong. Because he found himself tied to an execution rack, and his eyes were blindfolded. Not good, not good. This is definitely not good. Duque suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. If it was not a hostile force, he would never be tied up like this. Who knew how many seals were placed on his body to forcibly suppress the circulation of the magic circuit in his body? It would be better if the system elf was operating normally, but after passing through the time barrier, the system elf seemed to be temporarily down. Who was it? Which faction was it? Logically speaking, in Azeroth, it was probably the Forsaken who hated him so much, right? What the hell, am I really that unlucky? Did I suddenly fall into the hands of those skeletons? Or did history change drastically again, and I came to a time when the situation is collapsing? Suddenly, a deliberately suppressed voice sounded in Duque's ear. It was a hoarse voice, and other than judging that it should be a female voice, Duque could not tell anything else. Duke Marcus. Do you know what sin you have committed? Accompanied by a sharp rebuke was the sound of a long whip hitting the ground. Chapter 1082. Whip? Wax dripping? Yamit? It sounded so scary. Duque's face fell. This. If you're a demon from the Burning Legion, then my crime of slaughtering 5 billion of your people is unforgivable. But, can I trouble you not to use an old torture tool that hasn't been used in centuries to pretend to be a demon from the evil faction in such a beautiful place? Really, you don't look like one at all. Suddenly, there was another whip. This time, it accurately brushed past the side of Duke's cheek, and the strong wind it brought caused Duke's face to feel a stinging pain. I didn't ask you about the Burning Legion. The woman was furious. Not official business? Then. Tyrant, is that you? If there was anyone that Duque owed, it would definitely be Tyrant. After all, whether it was intentional or not, he had committed crimes in the ancient war and left her behind for 10,000 years. Ha! You still know? As if adding fuel to the fire, the woman's voice suddenly rose by an octave. In her rage, she finally revealed her original voice. Everyone had their own unique way of speaking. Tyrant's voice, which was filled with holiness and did not seem angry even when she was angry, was something that only the priestesses of the moon shrine possessed. Duque no longer hesitated and used his ultimate move. He did something that she definitely did not expect. He used his muscular strength and broke the two rusty and brittle shackles on his wrists in a very manly manner. The next moment, he followed the voice and hugged the beauty in front of him. "I'm sorry, Tyrant." Before Duque could finish speaking, he instinctively felt that the woman in his arms was not Tyrant. The height of her breasts was completely different. One had to know that before he transmigrated, Duque had visually measured Tyrant's size. Over the past 10,000 years, she had not weakened at all. Alright, here comes the terrible question: who is she? At that moment, Duque clearly felt the malice of the goddess of destiny. As the black cloth in front of his eyes slid off, Duque could clearly see that he was hugging a green-haired priestess. Less than 5 meters in front of him, the main character of the scene, Tyrant, pushed open the door angrily and saw everything perfectly. Such a melodramatic scene. Who dares to tell me that no one deliberately arranged it? I, Duque, will be the first to not believe it. But, as expected, Tyrant flew into a rage. Die. Duque. Tyrant raised her hands and used her ultimate skill, Starfall. Duque's face froze. What had happened to Tyrant in the past 10,000 years? Why did it accumulate so much resentment? Duque had no way of knowing the answers to these questions. All he knew was that things were getting out of hand. The thick clouds in the sky were suddenly parted by a huge meteor, bringing with it the shrill cry of death as it crashed down. It was a meteor the size of a carriage. Only Tyrant, as the high priestess of the moon goddess, could accurately use Elun's power to make the meteor fall from outer space towards Duque. The blue beam of light locked onto Duque's forehead was the best guide. Under the power of the moon goddess, the meteor sped up and sped up. From breaking through the clouds to landing on Duque's forehead, it took less than 3 seconds. Perhaps Duque could have chosen to dodge or use his Breaking Dawn magic to defend himself. If not, he could have used Ice Barrier to take the hit. Duque did not. Because when he saw the anger written all over that beautiful face that seemed to have been separated for only half a day, Duque's heart suddenly ached. What happened to Tyrant was also recorded in the original history. In the original timeline, she was also captured by Savis, but because of the Gemini's strategy, even Archimonde could not touch Tyrant under Elun's power. Even so, many night elves were unhappy with Tyrant because of this, believing that she had already submitted. No. In fact, being captured was a humiliation in itself. Because of this, rumors began to spread. They said that Tyrant had been tainted by demons and had lost her purity, so she did not have the right to be the high priestess of Elun. They also said that Tyrant had already betrayed her people like Queen Azhara, but there was no evidence. There were even rumors that Tyrant had instructed Malfurion to protect Illidan, who should have been sentenced to death. In the original timeline, Tyrant was already so sad. Now that Duque was a living witness, Duque could totally imagine what kind of scolding Tyrant had endured in the past 10,000 years, such as being despicable, immersed in lust, abandoning the Stormrage brothers. Duque silently sensed the falling meteorite from the sky. When the death that fell from the sky smashed the roof and was about to fall on his head, Duque still made a heavy decision. It seemed like he had not died for a long time. Then I'll die this time, I owe you. Arcane impact. With only the force of impact pushed the woman in his arms away. Duque looked up 45 degrees to the sky, with a faint smile on his face, and opened his arms. Accompanying that resigned expression was the tear that flowed from his left eye. When the meteorite was less than a meter away from Duque's head, Duque silently mouthed 3 words, yes. No. Rise. Then, Duque calmly closed his eyes and waited for death to come, whoosh. Very abruptly, the sound of destruction came to an abrupt end. The once incomparably noisy world seemed to have been erased by the attack of the gods. death did not come as expected. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. When Duque could not help but open his eyes again, he saw an incomparably shocking scene. The meteorite that seemed to be able to pierce through a mountain had actually stopped less than 10 centimeters away from his head. A bright white light enveloped the entire meteorite, preventing it from descending any further. The next moment, a head of long blue hair with streaks of silver covered Duque's entire vision. Before he could even react, Duque's lips had already been taken over by an incomparably domineering force. Under the immense force in front of him, Duque's entire body fell backwards, and he felt dizzy. That familiar deep kiss, that familiar feeling of her chest. That's right, it's definitely Tyrande. Duque was a little confused, but this did not stop him from enjoying the beauty's love. How long did they kiss? Almost to the point of suffocation. It was only then that Tyrande lifted her head reluctantly. Looking at the silver thread that connected their lips, Tyrande's face flushed red in an instant. Bastard! Why didn't you dodge? Tyrande scolded. Chapter 1083. At this moment, Duque was possessed by the best actor. At this moment, Stephen Chow and Duque were together. Even though it was not a complete lie, Duque still decided to use this nuclear bomb level line and changed it. Once, the goddess of fate placed a strange but sincere love in front of me, and I could not cherish it. In the 10,000 years that I spent in the river of time, I spent every day and night in regret. This is the most painful thing in the world. Since the heavens have given me a chance to reunite after 10,000 years, even if I die at the hands of that woman, I will say, I'm sorry, but I love you. Bastard, how can I hate you when you're like this? Tyrande's tear ducts burst. Because she was on top and he was on the bottom, her bead-like tears washed Duque's face. Duque smiled bitterly and touched the side of Tyrande's face. He comforted her gently. It's okay, I'm back now, right? Sob, sob, sob. I'm so touched. I don't hate you anymore. Hearing the crying from next door, Duque felt a little awkward. Who the hell are you? Why are you crying too? Tyrande was so angry that she laughed and turned her head. Chandrese. This has nothing to do with you. I'll deal with you for imprisoning Duque later. Duque was dumbfounded. I'm sorry, Duque. She's Chandrese, my adopted daughter during the ancient war. Sigh. I can't even get rid of her. Sigh, I shouldn't have spoiled this little girl. Please. I'm over 10,000 years old. Chandrese grimaced. Duque wanted to facepalm. Of course he knew who Chandrese Feathermoon was. After the cataclysm, the Feathermoon stronghold was on land, and a troublesome hunter kited to Orgrimmar. He wanted to see a good show where the leader of the Horde defeated the leader of the Alliance, but he failed. Brainless Howl and Gammer lost to her in single combat. The most overpowered thing was that she had inherited Tyrande's Starfall, and Prayer of the Moonlight Goddess, which allowed her to attack the entire screen. He was definitely one of the fiercest leaders in the Alliance. However, this guy was still a one-sided love, and he had been single for 10,000 years. Yes, the one who had a crush on her was Maeve Shadowsong's younger brother, Jared Shadowsong, the de facto leader of the Allied army. Since Tyrande had pointed out Chandrese's name, Duque had a general idea of what was going on. This was the gushing spring lake of Teldrassil, a giant island in the middle of the sea where only the night elves lived. For some reason, when he transmigrated back to this world, he was discovered by Chandrese, who hated him for abandoning Tyrande. If not for Tyrande's arrival, it would have been a melodramatic scene. Now, it could be considered a pass. The house had been destroyed by Tyrande's Starfall, and such a huge commotion could not be hidden from the people nearby. After Tyrande sent Chandrese to clean up the mess outside, Duque and Tyrande finally went to a room belonging to the Alun sisters to have a good chat. Duque was eager to know what had happened while he was away. Duke, who was the first to enter, was dumbfounded. He cursed on the spot, Holy sh*t. Resentment. Soaring resentment. Thousands of bananas, like dried meat, were hung on the four walls with their eyes wide open. These dried bananas looked like specimens that had lost all their moisture, but still maintained their bright yellow color. They were arranged neatly from floor to ceiling on the 4-meter-tall wall. I suddenly remembered that I have something urgent to attend to. Duque turned around and left. Unfortunately, it was too late. Tyron still had the holy smile of a high priestess on her face, but her actions were not holy at all. Sister, why are you taking off your equipment if not to run faster in the dungeon? Although he was shocked, Duque's pair of shifty eyes could not move away. Haha. You didn't even want to tell me your real name back then. In the end, 10,000 years later, when your lover found me and told me that you had gone to the ancient war, I found out that Duque was Duque. May I ask, dear Mr. Duque, what urgent matter is more important than catching up? Yes. The world of Azeroth is still waiting for me to save it. Duque said with his head held high. Oh. If it wasn't for the fact that you have protected the world of Azeroth for 10,000 years, do you think I would wait for you like an idiot for 10,000 years? Duque clenched his teeth and instinctively took a step back. As he did so, he fell to the ground. Tyrant. We are both people of status. Don't get physical. If you have something to say, let's talk. Fine. So what if I use my mouth to convince you? Tyrant put her hands behind her back, but she did not stop walking. She approached him step by step. At that moment, Duque finally understood what it meant to fall into one's own trap. Back then, when the 7 great sins broke out, he had given Tyron 10 terabytes of information. Now, retribution had come. Duque looked at the lingering bananas and finally broke down. Don't scare me. I actually have a weak heart. Tyron did not say anything. One look from her made Duque's blood flow become uneven. Scream then. Scream then. Here, no one will hear you even if you scream your lungs out. Tyron used the words that Duque had given her all those years ago. She almost angered Duque to death. Duque was quite strong-willed. When he realized that he would be stabbed no matter what he did, his temper flared up. He put his hands on his waist and laughed out loud. Ha 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 ha. Tyrant. Have you forgotten? You haven't beaten me even once. Do you still remember the terror of being controlled by Duque's godly sword? Sorry. A certain lover was too unqualified and didn't come for 10,000 years, so I've long forgotten. With that, Tyrant launched an attack. How terrifying was 10,000 years of resentment. One could tell from Duque's pitiful howl. No, don't stop. This battle would later be called the Battle of 10,000 Years, by the two of them. This battle was truly earth-shattering and earth-shattering. With the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza's blessing of life, countless warriors were quickly duplicated. Billions of soldiers bravely sacrificed their lives for the sake of righteousness. In Duque's mind, this battle was also called the Clone War. Cough cough. Duque came back to his senses, and the first thing he did was to set those banana lords on fire and expiate them. This thing was simply ominous. Of course, what made Duque's head hurt the most was the news that Tyron told him. What? It's been 20 years since the Dark Portal? Tyron said faintly, yes. We agreed to wait for 10,000 years, but you're 20 years late. Chapter 1084. Duque was like a dead dog in the soul. Thanks to the Red Dragon Queen's buff, Duque made it through. He pressed down on Tyron just like that. Normal people wouldn't like such a feeling, but Tyron seemed to enjoy treating Duque like a human blanket. As for being 20 years late, Duque actually wanted to say that he was only 2,000ths of a time late. But considering that Tyron's days felt like years, Duque decided to shut his mouth. Transmigration is too messy. Tyron sighed. Blame Nosdorm. When I have time, I'll definitely find him. Forget it. I'm already very happy that you're back. At least I can tell myself that the long and painful wait has finally come to an end. Phew, Duque exhaled. Get up. We have more things to do than a mountain. Eek. Just as Tyrande stood up, her body suddenly stiffened. Her blue eyebrows furrowed. What? Does it hurt? I told you not to be so crazy. Duque took the opportunity to lecture her. No, my body is fine. You just pressed against my hair. Duque suddenly wanted to cry. Damn, a female driver can't be hurt while racing. Half an hour later, a radiant Tyrande returned to the priestess and elegance of the high priestess. Duque didn't know if he was a fraud or if Tyrande was a fraud. All right, great uncrowned lord of the Alliance, after you've visited your precious queens, I'll be waiting for you. Remember to stay one more night when you come to sign the contract. Duque bared his teeth. Tyrande really dared to say that. All right, Duque knew that he couldn't promise her anything. After all, he could only give her one title. If he gave her one, what about the others? If he made a mistake, the Alliance would have a civil war before the Horde could rise. But, contract? Rin and Bronzebeard invited me to join the Alliance many times. I've been dragging it out. It's not that the Night Elves don't want to join, but it's because I didn't dare to leave the fate of my people in Varian Rin's hands. He was still too young and lacked experience. And after he disappeared and returned, he became muddle-headed. When Duque heard this, his heart skipped a beat. Indeed, without him around, history would easily return to its original path. However, Duque had no intention of saving William at the moment. Whether or not a person could become a useful person depended on their talent. Those with good talent would undoubtedly succeed more easily than those with poor talent. In this life, William's teenage years were relatively smooth. Because of Duque's intervention, King Lang's death was delayed for a long time. This prevented William's childhood from being too terrible. This, in turn, has its disadvantages. Without the bitter days of being homeless and living under someone else's roof, William's temperament in this life was still too jumpy and not steady enough. Apart from talent, the key to a person's success was experience. Only by gaining true experience from cruel events and sharpening one's willpower and ability would one have the opportunity to become a true expert. Therefore, even though Duque knew who the mastermind was, Duque still chose to remain silent. For years had passed, and the biggest news was Anduin Lothar's death. He had passed away peacefully last spring at the age of 65 after receiving the news of William's return. For humans in this era, Lothar was considered to have lived a long life. Moreover, he had been seriously injured during the duel with Orgrim on the scorching plains, which left him with a lingering illness. It was already a miracle that he could survive for so long. Moreover, he had repeatedly rejected the eternal life that Duque had stolen from Nosdormu. My life can be said to be magnificent. I've failed before, but I've always won in the end. As a warrior, I've already obtained the ultimate glory. I have no regrets to be able to see William and you grow up and become independent. Let me die as a knight. This was what Lothar had said to Duque back then. Duque knew that Lothar hoped that the Arthi royal bloodline, which was meaningless in his eyes, would end here. This was because a noble and righteous bloodline would not be a good thing for the human countries, or even the entire alliance. Sigh. The noble has already passed away, but a fellow like me has obtained eternal life. Duque could not help but mock himself. Suddenly, Tyrande held Duque's face in her hands, and a pair of silver eyes that seemed to be able to speak shot a reproachful gaze at him. Duque. Don't belittle yourself. By belittling yourself, you're belittling me. What do you think drove me to learn those things that made me want to die from embarrassment? And why do you think I had to wait for you for 10,000 years? There's only one answer. A great hero like you is worthy of me giving up everything to love you. It's worth me going crazy for you, and even falling for you. Do you understand? Faced with Tyrande's burning gaze, Duque could not hold it in any longer and kissed her fiercely. Compared to Lothar's death, what surprised Duque more was that Alucia had become the queen of the new Alterac kingdom last year. Alterac's territory included the current South Sea city-state, Gorehold Castle, Terran Mill, and the old broken ridge of the former Alterac kingdom, with South Shore as its capital. Although this had all happened when Duque was not around, Duque could still understand the context of the matter. His harem seemed to be using this method to maintain their influence within the alliance. Servanas, Jaina, Alucia, and now Tyrant, as well as Kalia, who had always been loyal to Duque, meant that Duque had 5 votes in the kingdom. Moreover, Bolvar for Dragon was the regent of Stormwind, so it was not difficult to convince him. This meant that Duque still had the absolute say in the alliance. Originally, the alliance had a great advantage, but the problem was that in these 4 years, the Horde had risen rapidly. The biggest difference was that in this life, the Horde had accepted goblins into the Horde in advance. He did not know if it was because of the history of the Battle of the Scorching Plains, or because he had personally witnessed the Battle of Mount Hyjal, but the performance of the alliance had deeply stimulated Thrall. As a result, after the goblins on both sides who wanted to earn money through underhanded means were jointly blocked by Jaina and Alucia, Thrall directly threw out an olive branch to the angry goblins. In addition, Anastrian had brought the Forsaken to Winterspring. In terms of results, the Horde had basically surrounded half of the Night Elves' territory. Duque narrowed his eyes, and first drew a circle on the map of the Kalimdor continent, at the place that would become Rustwater Port in the future. We must not let the Horde surround us. What gave Duque the most headache was that in the report that Aurelia had sent to Tyrant, there was a piece of information. A large number of orcs, formerly of the Blackrock clan, had begun to occupy the Blackrock mountain area between the Burning Plains and the Scorching Canyon. They showed signs of colluding with the Black Dragons. Chapter 1085. After returning, Duque had a mountain of things to do. He should have immediately returned to Stormwind, but he owed Tyron too much. He could only give in under Tyron's aggrieved gaze and agreed to stay for a few more days. After the Battle of Mount Hyjal, Malfurion had once again entered the Emerald Dream, and Fandral Staghelm had just successfully planted the New World Tree, Teldrassil. Although the Dragon Kings refused to bless the Night Elves with eternal life, the Night Elves who believed that the World Tree was everything were now worshipping Fandral. Tyron did not bother with the popular Fandral, and instead gave him some of her worldly power. Duque asked around and felt that there were no problems. The leader of the Sentinels was now Chandri's Feathermoon, Tyron's adopted daughter. In other words, Tyron, who had military and divine power, was in no danger at all in terms of political power. But then again, daughter. I almost thought that Chandri's was our daughter. Duque seemed to say it casually, but he actually felt a little regretful. It had been 20 years since he transmigrated. Although his physical body was eternal, Duque felt that it was weird that no one had died. If it was just a woman, he might be able to push the blame. It's not that easy. Tyrant, who had just finished a great battle, smiled with satisfaction. Do you think I didn't want to have a child with you? With a child, I wouldn't have been so lonely in the past 10,000 years. But Goddess Elun told me not to think about it before I become a demigod. Ah! Duque cried out. What? Didn't the goddess repair your soul and expel the power of darkness for you after the War of the Ancients? Yes. That's right. After that, the goddess sighed. It was the first time she saw such a special soul. Tyron sighed regretfully. Special? How so? The souls of other creatures are fixed. Unless they have a miraculous encounter, their soul capacity will only decrease most of the time. But your soul seems to be able to increase or decrease at will. As long as the core of your soul is not damaged, you can even revive like a demigod. Yes. A mortal who has the chance to come back from the dead like a demigod. Duque's heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly smiled bitterly. He didn't expect it to be like this. Coincidentally, his greatest secret came from his most special soul. Having such a soul is a blessing from the heavens for magic cultivation. The fact that you've reached the Breaking Dawn realm at such a young age proves this point. But Tyron touched her flat abdomen through her mooncloth priestess dress. A woman's stomach can give birth to life, but it still requires the soul seeds of both parents to be planted in it. Only then can a complete new life be born. Du Mao was dumbfounded. Whether it's me or the other lovers you've met before, the strength of our souls is pretty good. Unfortunately, it's not strong enough to bear your soul seed. That's why I'm willing to be your lover, not your wife. Tyrant hugged Duque tenderly. Is that so? Duque was so shocked that he didn't know what to say. There was a faint bitter smile on Tyrant's pure face. Of course it's true. Didn't you see that our goddess had no choice but to give herself to Lord Malorn? Only the strongest demigod can barely become the partner of a true god. Back then, our goddess had forcefully suppressed her own power to give birth to the demigod Cenarius. On the other hand, if you can become a demigod, you might be able to control and suppress the power of your own soul, and give us a child. Duque's heart was in turmoil. Damn, there's actually such a thing. It was very mysterious and very nonsensical, but Duque's intuition told him that it was all true. Duque secretly asked the system elf, and received a similar feeling. My apologies. Ever since you became a radiant moon wizard, your soul power has far surpassed that of a woman in the hero domain. I had no choice but to forbid you from leaking your soul power. Otherwise, every time you use your divine sword, you'll instantly give your opponent 100 radiant moon, breaking dawn level, spirit blast. If you want to take someone's life, I can help you open the door to your soul. Duque was also helpless when this matter was brought up. But deep down, Duque didn't want to suppress his power to give birth like Elun. Which father didn't want their offspring to surpass their parents? Look. The demigod Cenarius sounded very cool, didn't it? Grandpa Roar could kill him with one chop of his axe. In the ancient war, although the wild boar gods and bear gods weren't as weak as trash, they weren't strong enough. They were almost wiped out by the Burning Legion at their peak. At this thought, Duque let out a turbid breath. It seemed that he had to break through the breaking dawn level and become a demigod as soon as possible. At the demigod level, he would at least have a true immortal body. For example, White Stag Malorn. After he died in the ancient war, Elun didn't even cry, because Malorn didn't really die. Another example was Mediv, who was said to have died in Karazhan. When the Calamity Army arrived, his mother made a move, and immediately believed in Brother Spring and revived on the spot. Pursuing immortality? It seems that I'm still a normal person. While Duque was mocking himself, he suddenly felt waves of spatial fluctuations. Tyrant's expression darkened. Your lovers really do send people to keep an eye on me 24/7. I wanted to monopolize you for a few more days. Duque rubbed his forehead and thought, they're already giving you a lot of face. Otherwise, they would have attacked you immediately. How could they wait for more than a day? You've already made such a big commotion with Starfall, how can you hide it from them? Dark Portal, Year 20, December 25th, many Alliance queens and important figures suddenly visited Teldrassil. Seeing Chandri stuttering as she sent a message saying that the Alliance queens had suddenly arrived, Tyrant elegantly let go of Duque's hand, tidied up her clothes, and smiled. Let them in. The door opened, and Sylvanas, who couldn't hold herself back, was the first to rush in. She pressed Duque down and kissed him passionately. Elogia and the rest surrounded Duque gently, waiting for Sylvanas to finish venting his feelings before going up to him. Only Aurelia walked over and extended her right hand to Tyrant. Should I say, welcome? Tyrant smiled like a flower. Time travel is a terrible thing, but this is good. At least in the calendar, I'm Duque's first woman. Aurelia rolled her eyes. Chapter 1086. Just then, Jaina walked over and teased, I wonder which high priest said that he was only poisoned and then saved by a guy called Dukong? Tyrant leaned over and whispered into Jaina's ear, are you going to admit to a stranger that you don't know well that you were taken captive on the battlefield, and that you lost both your body and mind, only to find out that he was the strongest traitor in the Burning Legion, and that you turned the tides and became a great hero? You didn't lose anything, and you even received the approval and blessings of your goddess? Tyron's matter had been thoroughly investigated by Vanessa after she returned. All the women in Duque's harem knew about it. Even though they knew, they still felt that it was very mysterious. The leaders of the allied nations that had no interaction with each other before the Battle of Mount Hygel had already been taken care of by their own men in the future. Just thinking about it made their heads burn. Aurelia wasn't angry at all. Instead, she smiled and asked, "Why didn't you confirm it before the Battle of Mount Hygel?" Tyron shook her head. "The great hero I know, Du Kong, is a superhero who has the blessing of the moon goddess Alun and the blessing of the life giver. During the Battle of Seamount and Mountain, Duque didn't have these two blessings. So that's how it is. Alright, sisters." Sylvanas finally finished eating and pulled up Duque, whose upper body was covered in lipstick marks. "Since that bastard Duque is finally willing to return from the River of Time, let's celebrate." Aurelia, Sasha, Alicia, Jaina, and Tyrant all raised their hands in excitement. "Oh, hooray. Duque, don't think that just one more vote is enough. Accept your fate." Seeing the excited harem, Duque was embarrassed. "All right. Luckily, I have Alexstrasza's blessing." If the Red Dragon Queen knew that Duque used her blessing like this, would Duque be beaten to death? This could also be considered as some kind of happy trouble. On that day, it was rumored that someone had seen a few sexy Christmas girls at the gushing spring lake going in and out of the place where Duque was staying. There was even a general of a certain sentinel troop who claimed that he saw his beloved adoptive mother wrapping a red ribbon around him, treating him as some kind of a Christmas present and putting him into a big Christmas gift box. Of course, a certain someone seemed to have been forced by a certain high priest to swear that he had never said such a thing. All the trifles were tidbits of news, not worth mentioning. There was only one piece of news that swept across the entire alliance and horde in the shortest time possible. The great hero of the alliance, Duke Marcus, who had saved the world many times, had finally returned from the River of Time. On the same day, the Night Elves reached an agreement with the alliance and announced that they would join the alliance. After receiving the news, Thrall, who was patrolling Orgrimmar's Valley of Power, suddenly smiled bitterly. Should I say, as expected of Duke Marcus? Beside him, Grom, whose hair had already turned white, suddenly said, "I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's him. Unfortunately, he's not from the tribe." Indeed. Thrall didn't even need to open the map to know how disadvantageous it would be for the Horde if the Night Elves joined the alliance. Grey Valley itself was the traditional territory of the Night Elves. Even if his subordinates yelled, "If the elves don't want to give us more wood, we'll get it ourselves," Thrall had never thought of waging war with the elves. The elves were not a weak race. Even if they lost 100,000 troops in the Battle of Mount Hygel, the elves were still very powerful, and it was impossible to win without the strength of the entire horde. Moreover, the elves' nest had already been moved to the giant island of Teldrassil. Even if the horde could occupy Grey Valley, they would not be able to completely dominate the entire continent of Kalimdor. This was because the Black Coast to the northwest of Kalimdor had an extremely long and complicated coastline, and the elven fleet could land on any part of the coast. The horde's navy was completely absent. Sigh. Thrall let out a long sigh. He knew that if Duque sacrificed himself, it would be for the world of Azeroth, but the reproduction and survival of a race was such a cruel thing. If a race or an organization wanted to survive and develop, they would need more living space and more resources. Without Duque, the alliance would be like a plate of loose sand. William, that little brat, would not be able to support such a large alliance, let alone deal with the incomparably complicated internal situation of the alliance. As long as the Night Elves did not join the alliance, Thrall was confident that he could make use of the Orc's strong reproductive ability, and use at most 2 generations of 30 years to make the Horde the overlord of Kalimdor. It was a pity that the person he did not want to see the most had returned. At first, he did not feel it, but now it seemed that Duque's plan was extremely incisive. When he first opened up Duroder, he did not think too much about it. Later, he found out that the alliance had opened up Theramore City in the southern part of Duroder. Now that the Night Elves had joined the alliance, it was tantamount to a pincer attack on Orgrimmar from the north and south. This was quite detrimental to the development of the horde. Once, the goblins had mentioned to him that they wanted Ashara's land. If Duque was not here, it might have been possible. But now that Duque was here, the horde would not have a chance. It had only been 5 years since the orcs came to Kalimdor. The group of refugee children had just grown up, which allowed the horde's military strength to recover to a little more than 100,000. With the technical support of the goblins, the horde's military strength had greatly increased. Unfortunately, they were still no match for the Alliance. It was because he had fought alongside the Alliance that Thrall clearly understood what kind of monster the Alliance was now. They could easily mobilize more than 1 million regular soldiers, and all the youths had to undergo strict military training. In fact, the Alliance had more than 3 million reserve soldiers. Moreover, the battle at Mount Hyjal had proven that the Alliance had the terrifying ability to quickly transport more than 100,000 troops across the sea. With the Burning Legion and the Scourge Army as a common enemy, the Alliance was, of course, happy to cooperate with the Horde. However, after losing the common goal, the conflict between the two sides would definitely be triggered again due to territorial disputes and other issues. After all, no one had forgotten the hatred of the past. The previous generation of Alliance warriors had all become generals, and they had not forgotten the wanton massacre of the old Horde on the Eastern Kingdom. Similarly, the Horde had not forgotten the days when they were enslaved by the Alliance. This hatred would not be so easily resolved. It was very likely that there would be a war between the Alliance and the Horde in the future. Thinking of this, Thrall felt a little suffocated. He turned to inform Varrock, "Tell Anastrian that I agree to meet him in secret. He can choose the location, but it cannot be too far from the Horde's territory." Chapter 1087. Grom was a little surprised. "You want to use those bones?" Thrall didn't care. Ever since the battle at the Dark Portal, the Horde has been using the Death Knight tradition, hasn't it? Orgrim did it, and so did the former chief, Zul. Grom shook his head. "I mean, aren't you afraid of angering the Alliance?" Thrall smiled. "That's why it's a secret meeting. As long as the Alliance doesn't declare war on the Horde, the Forgotten Ones won't join the Horde." Grom sighed. "You've really matured." Thrall still had a difficult childhood in this life. Whether it was his career as a gladiator, Orgrim's teachings, or the experience of leading his people west to the Endless Sea, Thrall had trained him well. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if Varian hadn't gone missing in this life, he would have been completely defeated by Thrall. After becoming the leader of the Horde for 5 years, Thrall had become more mature and farsighted. The rarest thing was that Thrall, who was making the Horde rise again, was only 20 years old. The people of the Horde didn't doubt that Thrall could lead the Horde for at least another 30 years. Thrall looked to the east. The Horde has fallen far behind the Alliance. I hope that the disaster at the Burning Steps can hold the Alliance back. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that other than a certain cheating transmigrator, the Horde knew the disaster that the Alliance had caused. That was because the ones who led the trouble at the Blackrock Mountain were the 2 sons of the first chief, Red Blackhand and Maim Blackhand. Thrall had originally lamented that the Alliance had completely dominated the Eastern Kingdom and was far stronger than the Horde. Now that he received this news, Thrall only wanted to laugh. The location of the Burning Steps was too important. It was located in the core area of the southern continent, but the geographical conditions were extremely harsh. There was lava and volcanic ash everywhere, and it wasn't a place for humans to live. Other than the Blackrock orcs and Black Iron dwarves who were naturally resistant to fire, no other race could live well there. Even Thrall would have a headache if he were to occupy a place like the Blackrock Mountain. At this time, Thrall still had the mentality of watching a show. If he knew who the real master of the Blackrock Spire was and what was under the Blackrock Mountain, his attitude might be a little different. The Dark Portal, December 28, 2020. Even in the warmer Stormwind, it was still a world of ice and snow. Winter was the time when all things withered. Winter was also the time when people who had worked hard for a year could enjoy the fireplace in their warm homes and enjoy the harvest of the year. Thanks to Duque's valuable thoughts on internal affairs, the current Stormwind was far better than the Stormwind in history, where people struggled in hardship. From west to east, there was a railway that ran through the entire kingdom. The wheat in the western wilderness could be harvested today, and the day after, it could be transported across the entire elven forest along the railroad, bypassing the Reedridge Mountains and passing through the Swamp of Sorrows to the Watchtower in the Cursed Land. From north to south, there was a subway from Iron Forge to Stormwind City. From Stormwind City to Goldflash Town, all the way south through the Twilight Forest, a new railway was being built. Currently, the southernmost end of the railway had reached Crow Ridge. In another 2 years, this north-south railway would reach Stranglethorn Vale. Even though the railway was only half open, a steady stream of weapons and supplies was still being sent through the railway to the Expeditionary Army in Stormwind to develop Stranglethorn Vale. Now, the area around the Horde's Grom High Camp, including the Baral and Zakunda ruins, had officially become Stormwind's territory. The entire kingdom was talking about the troll ornaments and gold tools that had been plundered from the Troll Empire's ruins. With the addition of the Reedridge Mountains, the Swamp of Sorrows and the Upwind Path under Duque's control, Stormwind's territory was more than 3 times larger than it was in history. The prosperous situation made every citizen smile from ear to ear. At the same time, it also bred corruption. With the economy doing well, the lords of Stormwind could practically lie down at home and still earn money every day. Gradually, the new generation of nobles forgot the humiliation of losing their territories and the grief of losing their loved ones, and began to indulge in pleasure. On the 28th, the important ministers of Stormwind gathered at the new Stormwind stronghold. This was because they were going to discuss the next year's important matters. Every year, major events of Stormwind would be discussed in winter and carried out in the spring of the next year. Luxurious carriages were parked in front of the even more majestic Stormwind stronghold's gate. Many nobles, even if they were just there to listen, were dressed to the nines. Since 2 years ago, they had formed a habit of waiting at the gate of the stronghold for her to appear. She did not disappoint them, and she came. 2 pure black horses without a single strand of hair on them pulled a black carriage with golden edges and slowly drove into the square in front of the fortress. A peerless beauty stepped out of the carriage with the help of a marquis. She had long black hair that fell to her shoulders, soft and smooth. She seemed to have been carved by a craftsman in imitation of a goddess, and she had the most charming smile on her face. She wore a purple shirt with silver edges and a diamond-shaped hollowness in the middle of her chest, showing off her seemingly bottomless cleavage. She wore a bright red floor-length dress. Just her appearance alone caused a wave of low exclamations of admiration. For dozens of nobles to wait, those who did not know might have thought that there was a queen in Stormwind, and they were waiting for the queen to arrive with a posture of worship. Unfortunately, she was not a queen. She was just a countess, Countess Katrana Anristo, the illegitimate daughter of an old Stormwind noble. In fact, that noble had already been annihilated at sea during the retreat of Stormwind City in the first year of the Dark Portal. But she had enough documents to prove her identity, and with the most elegant speech and wisdom, she conquered the entire Stormwind noble circle in a short span of 3 years. If it wasn't for Duke's precedent, her rise to fame would have been a legend. Not only did she have amazing social skills, but she was also extremely outstanding in internal affairs. After Alucia ran off to become Alterax's queen, Bolvar had no choice but to accept the fact that this woman had snatched the power of internal affairs. Bolvar was an excellent regent. He was impeccable in terms of strength, virtue, and loyalty. Unfortunately, there was only one person in the world like Duque, who could even cross realms. His talent was all in military affairs. Originally, the next year's Internal Affairs Conference would still be the same as the past 2 years, with Katrana's words being in charge. This was because no one could refute her in the field of internal affairs. Today, the atmosphere seemed a little different. The nobles realized that beside the silly William, there was not only Bolvar's regent chair, but also a very mage-style chair. Suddenly, the ceremonial officer announced, "The Grand Duke of Stormwind, His Excellency Duke Marcus, has arrived." Chapter 1088. Every Stormwind nobleman gasped in shock. This was the Stormwind Kingdom, the strongest human kingdom in the entire Eastern Kingdom. 20 years ago, the Stormwind Kingdom had been destroyed in the first battle of the Dark Portal. However, the fallen Stormwind Kingdom was miraculously recovered, and it took more than 10 years to rise again, becoming one of the most outstanding human kingdoms. Even the oldest human kingdom, Lordaeron, could not compare to Stormwind. Due to the plague of the Scourge, and the loss of a large number of people in the war, the once powerful Lordaeron was now just a second-rate kingdom. On the other hand, Stormwind was able to thwart the infiltration and conspiracy of the Cursed Church during the Third Battle of the Dark Portal due to Duque's prior arrangements. They managed to avoid the plague that broke out in the northern continent. Moreover, when Lordaeron fell, Stormwind took in a large number of refugees and invested them in the development of Stranglethorn Vale and the Swamp of Sorrows. Even after the war ended, those who stayed were given land. Queen Kalia of Lordaeron did not force her people to return. Overall, Stormwind's national strength did not decline. The previous king, Lang, was undoubtedly an excellent king, but that was all. Compared to his two incomparably dazzling and inescapable subjects, Ryan was just a mediocre person. Anduin Lothar, the leader of the Stormwind Royal Guards, the leader of the Iron Horse Brotherhood, the first commander of the Alliance, the strongest human warrior, and the last confirmed direct descendant of Thoradin the Great. His life could be said to be legendary. He had participated in the killing of the demon king Sardras, who had possessed Mediva's body, killed the first chief of the Horde, fought head-on against Grom Hellscream, who had killed many famous Alliance knights in the Silverpine Forest, and led the charge in the Battle of the Scorching Plains when his side was at a disadvantage. His heroic story could be said for 3 days and 3 nights. Lothar was a model of chivalry. He was worshipped by countless knights and was destined to be sung for thousands of years. However, there was another person who was more famous than Lothar. That was Duke Marcus, the uncrowned king. On the military front, Duque had personally pierced through the chest of Mediv, who was possessed by Sardras. He commanded the weak army of Stormwind to set fire to the 200,000 Horde soldiers. He miraculously saved 50,000 Stormwind elites on the floating ice island, and was appointed as the Alliance's vice-commander before the age of 20. After that, he led the army to fight for thousands of miles, from the Battle of South Shore where the sea was dyed red, to the Eagle Nest Mountain, to the northernmost Kuil Salis on the mainland, to the siege of the Horde in Rotterdam, and finally to the decisive battle on the Scorching Plains that made the name of the Lightning War resound in both heaven and hell. When the Horde's third-generation chief, Nenta Zul, led the army to counterattack, it was his watchtower defense line that defeated the Horde's ferocious counterattack. During the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, he led the Alliance and defeated the main force of the Calamity Army in one fell swoop. In the end, the Calamity Army that had swept the Rotterdam Kingdom, the Dalajan Kingdom, the Rapids Castle Kingdom, and the Kuil Salis Kingdom was expelled from the Rotterdam Kingdom. What followed was the Battle of Mount Hyjal that almost destroyed the entire world of Azeroth. It was no exaggeration to say that in the field of military affairs, Duke Marcus was the god of war. Just based on this battle record alone, it was enough for Duque to be praised for thousands of years. But it was more than that. In the field of civil affairs, Duque was the greatest inventor and reformer. The new seeding technology, the mold-based construction of houses, the development of the marine economy in combination with the Murloc Nagas, the medical security system, the 6-year compulsory education, the economic construction of the Belt and Road Railway, and the continental integrated economic model that linked all railway and sea transportation. Many of his views and new ideas were fiercely opposed by countless people at the beginning. He used his unique vision and charisma to promote all of this in an almost tyrannical way. Time proved that everything he did and every policy he promulgated was correct. That was how the Stormwind, which had been completely destroyed by the war, was pulled into the Stormwind, which was extremely rich in resources today. His territory was already larger than the Stormwind, and even larger than many small countries. Rumors of his flirtatious exploits with several queens were spreading everywhere. No, it was no longer rumors. At least the 3 queens of Kurtiras, Lordaeron, and Alterac publicly announced that the person they loved was Duque. As long as Duque was willing, he would not hesitate to change the surname of the royal family to Marcus. However, Duque chose to be loyal, and like the other lords in the kingdom, he fulfilled his obligations as a vassal to the king of Stormwind. There was such a standard in the noble circle that was recognized all over the world. As long as a vassal paid taxes to the king on time and sent troops according to the strength of the territory during the war, he was a perfect vassal. Obviously, Duque's Marcus family did this impeccably. Therefore, for the nobles, Duque was also the embodiment of loyalty. Originally, it was said that Duque almost died because he was cursed in the Battle of Mount Hyjal, and after he recovered, he participated in the secret mission of the Dragon of Time, Nosdormu, and was likely to die in the River of Time. Suddenly, there was news that he had returned. After all, Duque was a legend among legends, a living legend. The nobles had mixed feelings. They coveted the benefits brought by Duque, but they also did not want Duque to return, because the return of such a powerful Grand Duke was bound to reshuffle the power of the entire kingdom. Compared to Duque, even Bolvar for Dragon, the regent, had to step aside. As the ceremonial officer finished the roll call, an archmage dressed in a dazzling epic mage equipment appeared at the door of the conference hall. Every single piece of equipment on his body emitted a strong magical wave visible to the naked eye. Even though he had repeatedly suppressed the magical power of the equipment, the flowing light and vibrant colors still overshadowed the jewelry worn by the nobles. Half a step behind Duque were two vassals of Duque, Earl Edwin Van Cleve and Earl Reginald Windsor. Behind them were two beautiful women dressed in maid clothes, and one of them was an elf. Those who knew the inside story, of course, knew that one was Van Cleve's daughter, Vanessa, and the other was the former follower of Prince Kuel Salus, Solarian. Not to mention the two important ministers signing autographs, even the maids were heroic domain masters or radiant moon mages. Only Duque could be so extravagant. Every noble, whether marquis or dukes, bowed their heads in respect. Duque strode forward, but stopped in front of a beautiful, black-haired female noble. "Hello. Beautiful lady, may I, Duke Marcus, have the honor to know your name?" "Hello. Your Excellency Duke Marcus, I am Countess Katrana Enristo." Katrana performed a very standard and elegant ladylike bow. "Very good. I'll remember you." A mysterious smile appeared on Duque's face. Chapter 1089. Remember you? The entire meeting hall was instantly filled with a low and rude commotion. No one cared about this little bit of impoliteness. To many nobles, this was definitely something that the Countess of Enristo could be proud of. Just like the epic achievements of the legendary hero, Duke Marcus, in the aristocratic circle and even the commoners' daily conversations, if a lady was fancied by Duke, it could be regarded as a glory that could be bragged about for a lifetime. Once upon a time, because countless noble ladies had tried to climb into Duque's bed when he was just an ordinary noble, many nobles envied and hated Duque and slandered Duque's sexual orientation. Later, as Duque's female friends were exposed one by one, this group of nobles who were gossipy to death immediately changed the topic, and boasted that only women who could catch Duque's eye were the true top beauties in the world. Just look, Jaina, Elucia, Kalia, the three Windrunner sisters, all those who were related to Duque were all famous super beauties. Suddenly, Duque expressed interest in this new noble lady who had recently appeared in the circle of nobles in Stormwind. The noble's soul of gossip was burning. The female nobles were envious. The male nobles were pounding their chests and stamping their feet because they felt that they had no advantage in front of the great hero and Grand Duke Duque. Apart from boasting that they had a slight advantage in terms of appearance, they all lost by a wide margin. Alright, this was just a small interlude. Although Bolvar, who had long been standing beside William, frowned at Duque's somewhat frivolous behavior, it did not matter. What happened next was the key. This was because the person Duque wanted to see was the King of Stormwind. This scene made many of the royal faction rather nervous because Duque's power was too great. King Lang had written more than one will before the war, appointing Andoin and Duque as regents for the young princes. The power of these two regents was beyond the imagination of outsiders. Andoin is my arm, and Duque is my brain. I trust them more than I trust myself. So, if they believe that my son does not have the right to be king, then they can choose another descendant of mine. If my bloodline is severed, then they have the right to hand over Stormwind to a more suitable person. They had the power to veto the Storm King. The power of these two regents was astonishing. What was even rarer was the fact that he had obtained the unanimous approval of King and Queen Lang, as well as the approval of the high-ranking nobles of Stormwind. At the end of the day, even Balver's position as the regent was actually given to him by Anduin. Obviously, even though they were both old Storm nobles, Balver's prestige was far inferior to Anduin's. The most obvious example was that Varian's son was named Anduin Rin. And after this little prince was baptized in the Church of Holy Light, his Christian name was impressively Duma, the first two words of Duke Marcus. Bolvar was also rather nervous now, because William. After his disappearance, he had become muddle-headed, just like a puppet. It was obvious that William was not suitable to be a king in such a state. If Duque announced that he was no longer a king, then Bolvar really could not find a reason to object. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Duque continued to move forward and arrived in front of the statue-like William, who was sitting foolishly on the throne. Seeing the beads of sweat on Balver's forehead, Duque smiled calmly. Phew. This smile made Bolvar, who represented the knights, secretly heave a sigh of relief. Unexpectedly, Duque did not kneel down on one knee or even bow. Instead, he bowed to Queen Tiffany, who was sitting on the throne beside William. This is, after bowing, Duque raised his head and said in a clear voice, "My apologies. I will not bow to a soulless body." Queen Tiffany's face instantly turned pale. William is just sick. The Queen, who was supposed to have died in the riot of the Mason Brotherhood, was still fine because Van Cleef had followed Duque and Stormwind was not as chaotic as in history. Duque shook his head and said loudly so that all the nobles could hear, "No. This is not a sickness. His Majesty William Rin's soul is not in his body." Ah! A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. The commotion among the nobles could not be suppressed. After his disappearance and recovery, William had been like a fool. Almost all the nobles thought that William had been hit in the head and was suffering from a concussion. Who knew that Duque would publicly say that William's soul was no longer in his body? If someone else had said this, there would definitely have been a lot of doubts. However, Duque was the strongest person in the realm of mystery. What's going on? Bolvar was very agitated. He stepped forward and almost wanted to grab Duque's shirt to ask. Everyone knew that William's disappearance had nothing to do with Duque. At that time, everyone knew that Duque had gone to participate in Nozdormu's secret mission. However, Duque suddenly said that William's soul was no longer in his body. This was obviously a huge conspiracy. Duque shook his head. "I don't know. But I can confirm that this is a type of evil magic." The Burning Legion or the Calamity Legion? Bolvar lost his voice. "No. If I have to say what it is, I'm afraid it's more like the methods of the ancient gods." "Then, don't worry, Bolvar. I have never thought of abolishing His Majesty William Rin. Because..." Suddenly, Duque's aura became very mysterious, and a torturous aura surged out. "When I was floating in the river of time, I saw a fragment of William's glorious future. F***ck. Was it that ridiculous? He even saw the future?" Alright, in theory, Duque had inherited it from Medivh. Medivh had already warned the various countries before the arrival of the Calamity Legion, which once again proved that Medivh was a torturous, no, a prophet. Now that Duque actually said that William would be very powerful, it was really hard for everyone to refute him. Duque turned his head and faced a large group of nobles. He raised his hands high and said, "I have always believed that humans are not born noble. If bloodline determines everything, then the great Anduin Lothar should be the ruler of the 7 human countries, and not choose to end his own bloodline." Duque's sudden statement caught the nobles off guard. Everyone was wondering what Duque was trying to do. Duque continued, "Whether a person is noble or not depends on his actions. Therefore, I think that His Majesty William, who has always been committed to building a better country and doing his best for the alliance, is a competent king. Therefore, as the subjects of His Majesty, what we have to do is to build a greater country in Stormwind when His Majesty is not around. Chapter 1090. If Duque deposed the king from the start, it would undoubtedly maximize the effect of establishing dominance, but it would also bring about another consequence, the division of power in Stormwind. Even if Duque put Anduin Rin on the throne, there would still be suspicions of narrowing the emperor to order his vassals. If he maintained the status quo, it would not disturb the core knights of Stormwind, nor would it alarm someone. With Duque being so easy to talk to, those guys who were ready to make trouble had no choice but to stop. After all, with Duque's identity and status, with such a huge foundation and the support of external forces, even if Duque told the Rin family to get lost and he himself became the king of Stormwind, it would not be surprising. Duque was advancing by retreating. Since he had given up on the most crucial issue of royal power, he would definitely reap the benefits in other areas. This was something that the nobles with a little political knowledge would understand. But no one would have thought that Duque's next bombshell would be so shocking. Like the most passionate speaker, Duque's hands were raised high like a conductor of an orchestra, stirring the heartstrings of the nobles. Everyone. Are you satisfied? Satisfied? Satisfied with what? Living in a castle that looks magnificent on the outside, but is actually built on quicksand, enjoying prosperity that can be destroyed at any time, and the taxes of your subjects, even if you will die in a few years. Even so, are you satisfied? What? Destroy? Again. Most of the nobles' faces were covered with makeup, but now, under the heavy makeup, their faces were as pale as they looked. Die? Die? No. Of course not. Death and the loss of inheritance were almost the things that the nobles feared the most. After experiencing 3 battles at the Dark Portal, is there anyone who still dreams of eternal peace? If there is, then let me give you a word of advice: don't be naive. The demons of the Burning Legion have already set their eyes on this beautiful planet. There may be peace, but every subsequent peace will be extremely short. If you do not wish to be destroyed, then bring out your drive, bring out your dignity as a noble, and prepare for war. War? Where is the enemy? As the leader of the knights, Bolvar stood up without hesitation. Duque waved his hand to stop Bolvar. No. There's no rush. This time, I'm here to tell everyone that the era of nobles being able to watch the soldiers fight on the front line as if it had nothing to do with them as long as they send soldiers and pay them is over, while they safely have a party in the rear is over. When Duque said this, all the nobles in the meeting hall felt their hearts skip a beat. Obviously, Duque was going to use his ultimate move. I hereby formally request Stormwind to reform the tax system. In the future, all tax officials will be dispatched by the kingdom. Taxes are divided into national tax and local tax in proportion. The national tax would be paid directly to the state and controlled by the state. The land tax was collected by the lord and used for the lord's daily expenses as well as the construction of the territory. At the same time, all entrance fees and road tolls will be abolished. In terms of military affairs, greatly reduce the number of private soldiers that nobles can legally possess. Grand dukes can only have 1,000 soldiers at most, and so on. The disbanded soldiers and those who pass the physical examination will all be incorporated into the country's regular army. The rest will be reorganized into local garrisons and supported by the country's finance. In terms of armaments, all mines will be uniformly mined by the country. Every year, a guide price will be set based on the market price and economic returns will be given to the lords. At the same time, the lords have the obligation to allocate empty land near the main roads for the country to build various military facilities according to local conditions. In one breath, Duque threw out a combination of punches, directly shocking the nobles to the point of suffering internal injuries. All the nobles felt like they were about to faint. This was digging out the roots of the nobles. In name, taxes did not increase, but which nobles did not have their own private coffers? Every year, the taxes would be 10,000 gold coins. At most, they would report 3,000 gold coins, and then pay 3,000 as taxes to the king. Now that even the tax officials had been changed to the countries, that private coffer would be the first to be destroyed. In terms of military affairs, abolishing the private soldier system was equivalent to abolishing military power. In the future, any family soldiers would only be at the level of a guard of honor and would not even be qualified to rebel. In terms of armaments, the nobles who occupied the mountains as kings were forced into a dead end. In the past, those who had mines in their territories were like hens that laid golden eggs, practically earning money while lying down. There were even lords who secretly refined the mines themselves, forged them into weapons, and secretly sold them to the tribes. Now, no one could play any tricks. With such a reform, nominally, the territories still belonged to the lords, but there would be no profits or autonomy. This was simply the biggest subversion of the aristocratic system. A marquis named Lionali exclaimed on the spot, "No. Even you, Grand Duke Marcus, do not have the right to announce the abolition of the aristocratic fiefdoms. This is the aristocratic norm set by Thoradin the Great. This is the cornerstone of the entire aristocratic world." Duque did not answer directly, but instead smiled strangely. "Sir Marquis, have you ever seen a big explosion that almost destroyed the world?" No, I have seen it. I just went to the ancient war 10,000 years ago and saw how the ancient Kalimdor continent exploding into today's Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdom continent. Do you want me to show you some magic images? Although he said no, in fact, Duque had already started to show them with a wave of his hand. Well, I'm sorry to inform you that there will be similar catastrophes in the near future. Sir Marquis, even if Stormwind City is likely to be engulfed by lava, do you still want to tell me that the rules set by Thoradin the Great, which destroyed the Empire 2,000 years ago, cannot be changed? Even if the lava lord Ragnaros, who is sleeping in the burning steppes, is about to awaken and turn the entire southern continent into a sea of fire purgatory, do you still dare to say that it has nothing to do with us? The aristocrats' faces turned green, but they did not know how to refute. Duque's voice suddenly rose by an octave. "Everyone. The times have changed. Relying on the contributions of our ancestors to enjoy the glory and splendor for 1,000 years is bound to be a dream. In the past 20 years, I, His Majesty Lang Rin, and His Excellency Anjuan Lothar have done so much for this country, carried out so many reforms, and built Stormwind City so strong together with everyone, not to give you the capital to be corrupt." "Corrupt, is it?" Bolvar suddenly laughed bitterly. The kingdom had become extravagant, and it was not that he did not notice this change. But as a great aristocrat, he could not stop the aristocrats from indulging in gold every day, living the same luxurious life as before. It was only at this moment that he realized how great Duque's reforms were. The world is facing destruction. We do not need vermin. Aristocrats who claim to be the elites of the kingdom. You have no choice. Either you keep up with the changes of the times, or you fall behind. At this point, Duque's face revealed a murderous look. "Of course. You can object. As long as you throw away the noble insignia on your chest and walk out of this door, your objection will take effect immediately." Chapter 1091. The nobles were shocked. They couldn't believe their ears. Duque, who had been missing for a long time, came back with drastic reforms and targeted at the roots of the nobles. Were the nobles still nobles without financial and military power? What right did the nobles have to do whatever they wanted in their own territories? Wasn't it just financial and military power? Almost all the respect and power were obtained from these two things. Now, without even informing them, he directly said that he would take back their power. This was killing them. They almost wanted to rebel on the spot. Unfortunately, no one dared. Compared to a peerless expert who killed the demon king Sargeras and the demon commander Archimond, they were practically trash. All the nobles' military power combined couldn't even defeat one of Duque's fingers. If it was 20 years ago, when the nobles of the 7 human kingdoms were united, they might be able to summon external forces and teach Duque a lesson for daring to challenge the rules of the nobles' game. Unfortunately, when the Storm nobles suddenly thought about it, their mouths were filled with bitterness, as if they had been forced to eat **t, unknowingly, the world of the nobles had already collapsed from one disaster after another. Among the 7 human kingdoms, Stormguard had already been destroyed and had yet to recover. Dalajan had a completely different system. By the way, the current chairman, Ronan, was Duque's personal disciple. Gilnas was still surrounded by a group of werewolves, and no one knew if his kingdom had been destroyed. Apart from Stormwind, the nobles of the remaining 3 countries were basically wiped out. Alterac, after the second battle of the Dark Portal, the Horde conquered Broken Ridge, and even the nobles including Eden Pyreus were wiped out. Only Duque's bloodline was left. Although Elugia ascended to the throne, the old Duke Berev still stayed in the Marcus family's territory. The entire family and even the kingdom were in cahoots with Duque. Lordaeron, after Arthas's betrayal, the core nobles of Lordaeron were all wiped out. Only staunch local lords like Mograine were left, but they were all the most loyal knights. Kurtiras, during the third battle of the Dark Portal, the entire mainland fell, and all the nobles were wiped out. Only Queen Jaina was left. Alright, the problem was that the 3 queens mentioned above were all considered to be Duque's lovers by the nobles. Outside help? It was already good enough that Duque didn't drag the rest of the human kingdoms over to hold down the fort. How could he ask for reinforcements? Not only did they not have any external help, but they also could not defeat Duque, whose power was equivalent to that of a country's monarch. The nobles were truly aggrieved. Commotion. Both sides were embarrassed. For a moment, everyone wanted to find someone else to go against Duque. Amidst the countless, "I'm not as good as you," and "Do you think I'm an idiot?" looks, the Storm nobles realized in despair that no one could do anything to Duque. Duque didn't even take out his staff. He just stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, demonstrating what it meant to be domineering with a smile. If looks could kill, then these useless nobles would have been killed on the spot, chopped up and fed to the dogs. Now, Duque was so domineering. "You can object. I can ignore it." Just like that, he used an almost barbaric manner to declare his power and force. Silence. Do not erupt in silence. Die in silence. Just like that, Duque, with a silent smile, killed the nobles' will to resist. Haha. Is there anyone else who wants to object? The gate is right there. Don't worry, as the regent of Stormwind, I have no intention of confiscating the property of those who object. After handing over the territory to the country, I will allow you to sell off the property in your territory. At the same time, I will allow you to continue to do business and live within the borders of Stormwind. Duque's attitude of, "I'm giving you a gift, but you're not thanking me for it," almost drove the nobles crazy. Rage spread through every vein in their bodies, but they couldn't vent it. They were practically suffocating to the point of suffering internal injuries. Bolvar was dumbfounded at the side. He wanted to speak a few times, and even when the nobles he was familiar with sent him pleading looks, his heart softened a little. But after squirming a few times, he didn't say anything in the end. What reverberated in his mind was what the late King Lang had said to him when he was still alive. Bolvar. Duque's reforms, with our intelligence, we can't understand them. In fact, you and I are both mortals. We don't have Anduin's courage, nor do we have Duque's intelligence. So mortals should do what mortals do. Leave the rest to them. We only need to confirm that they are doing it for the good of the kingdom and the people. That's enough. That's right. The ones who were truly valued by the late king were Duque and Anduin. I, Bolvar, am just a person who keeps what I've accomplished. Because he knew the limits of his intelligence, Bolvar's loyalty to the House of Rin ultimately overrode the interests of these nobles. Duque forcefully suppressed Bolvar and the knights, and they didn't utter a word. The resolution, which was almost a disaster for the nobles, was passed just like that. As soon as the meeting ended, Bolvar couldn't wait to summon Duque. Almost as soon as he entered the secret meeting room, Bolvar asked, "Duque, what are you trying to do? Bolvar, do you really not know, or are you just pretending? Stormwind has already decayed." Duque's expression turned cold, and he threw out a stack of petitions. I made so many reforms to make the entire kingdom rich, not to feed those vermin. Looking at the stack of petitions, Balver's eyes immediately closed in pain. You won't die if you don't court death. In the past, the lords controlled their territories. Even the king had to pay tolls to the lords when he opened a railway. Now that they were used to plucking feathers from the geese, and every train had to earn a sum of money, those nobles actually joined forces to besiege him, the regent, saying that they wanted to impose special tariffs on the supply trains that passed through their territories to the Overwatch Castle and the Cursed Land. Otherwise, they would stop the train every time it passed and check if there were any prohibited items. Other than that, the nobles made all sorts of noise because the land was privately owned. Bolvar, who abided by the iron law that the nobles' territories were not the king's for 2,800 years, could do nothing about it. However, he didn't think that Duque would immediately make a move upon his return. But this is too intense. This will cause the entire ruling class of the kingdom to collapse. Then let's change it to another batch. Even if we don't do anything, they will eventually perish under the enemy's attacks. The important thing now is whether we should destroy them, or let them continue to corrupt the entire kingdom, dragging the kingdom and even all of humanity into the abyss of destruction. Is it that exaggerated? What if I told you that the loss of Varian's soul was the plot of an enemy, and that enemy just so happened to be among the nobles? Balver's heart instantly froze. Chapter 1092. Bolvar was an extremely principled and strong-willed man. It was true that he was pained by the depravity of the nobles, but he was a knight loyal to the king first and a noble second. He clenched his teeth and said, "As long as you have evidence, I will support you even if you have to wipe out all the nobles in Stormwind City." Duque, on the other hand, became relaxed. There's no rush. Compared to wiping out the vermin in the country, don't you think that William is more important? Balver's eyes immediately lit up. He pounced on Duque like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey, grabbing Duque's arms tightly. You know where His Majesty's soul is? William's disappearance was the biggest stain on Balver's record as regent. It was the deepest humiliation. From the time William disappeared to the time he was found, he had become an idiot. Balver's heart was constantly tormented by guilt. The late king had handed William over to Lothar before handing him over to him. He had always been strict with himself and scrupulously abided by his duties as regent. Who would have thought that something like this would happen? If not for the fact that he had to support the country, Bolvar would have committed suicide long ago. Now that Duque had suddenly mentioned William's whereabouts, how could Bolvar not be agitated? Coincidentally, when I returned from the River of Time, I saw some fragments of William's future. Coincidentally, I returned from the new main city of the elves, Teldrassil, which was not far from that place. I did my best to confirm William's safety. He had lost his memory, but his body was in good condition. Wait. You confirmed that it wasn't His Majesty's soul? Bolvar was shocked. Then could it be that the His Majesty beside us is a fake? No. He's real too. William was unfortunate enough to be split into two by the evil magic of a certain existence. The cowardly and lazy person in the hall was him. The William on the Kalimdor continent was also him. Bolvar opened his mouth wide, stunned by this strange news. Why didn't you say so earlier? After entering the room, Duque had already set up a magic barrier to prevent eavesdropping, but he still made a shushing gesture. If I say that, won't the one lurking among the nobles realize that I've seen through everything? Who the hell is that guy? Bolvar gnashed his teeth. To think that a mysterious and powerful enemy had infiltrated right under his nose. This was definitely a dereliction of duty on his part. Duque patted Bolvar on the shoulder. Brother, your acting is too bad. I can't tell you, but you can rest assured and leave that guy to me. I believe you. I'll leave the domestic affairs to you. I'll personally lead the troops to fetch the other emperor back. At this moment, Bolvar was like a fanatic who was obsessed with Duque. His eyes were filled with stars. Duque also felt that he had gone overboard, but with Nosdormu's endorsement, no one could expose him. To be honest, even he himself felt that this statement was a little ridiculous, but Bolvar believed it 100%. Wait. William is not in danger. If you bring him back now, you'll only ruin his training. You said, training? Yes. Training. A hellish training. This is what William lacks. William is not bad, but the so-called not bad is only the standard of a mediocre king. He's not a wise king, and he's not good enough to carry the banner of the Alliance. Anduin and I have always had high hopes for William because he has the talent. Talent. Duque raised his head and looked at the ceiling. It was as if his gaze had pierced through the void and reached the river of history. There, the two ancestors, Lang and Anduin, were smiling at him. I've always believed that talent determines the height a person can reach. To reach this height, hard training is essential. William has the talent to become the leader of the Alliance, but his youth was too smooth. Too smooth. Bolvar's gaze was a little lost. Think about it. The current chief of the tribe, Sal, has a noble background, but he spent his entire childhood and adolescence as a slave gladiator in the arena. He has to face life and death battles almost every day. On the other hand, he has a real understanding of human life, society, and culture. He has knowledge and wisdom that far exceeds the level of the orcs. Furthermore, the former chief of the tribe, Orgrim, has been secretly teaching him and imparting the tribe's spirit. That's why the current wise and outstanding chief of the tribe, Thrall, was born. Bolvar was silent. Duque was right. Compared to Thrall, who had gone through hardships and tribulations, William's life had been too smooth before he turned 20. At that time, King Lang had not been assassinated. Even though he had suffered the pain of the destruction of his country, he had Duque's support for internal affairs, Anduin's support for external affairs, and Lang's protection and guidance. William, who had not truly experienced life and death, was only a little better than a flower in a greenhouse. As a loyal subject, Bolvar was more eager than anyone to see his lord's growth and metamorphosis. All right, Duque, you've convinced me. But first, I have to ensure His Majesty's safety. Sure, but I won't allow you to go, not even the royal knights. Why? Bolvar roared. Please, that place is not for holy knights. The holy light on your bodies is even more dazzling than a lighthouse in the night. Even if you send ordinary knights there. Those who only think of justice and loyalty will easily see the world as black and white, and mess things up. Bolvar understood Duque's meaning. All right. I'll let MI7 arrange for an elite team of rangers to go. Duque nodded in satisfaction. Coming out of the secret room, Duque sat in his personal carriage. The two important subjects, Reginald and Edwin, as well as the two maids, Vanessa and Solarian, were already waiting there. As a Grand Duke, he still had to have the necessary extravagance. The carriage was very large, and each side was enough for one person to lie down comfortably. There were also many protective spells and anti-eavesdropping spells. Sitting opposite him, Edwin Van Cleef was the first to bow his head and admit his mistake. I'm sorry, my lord. I didn't even know that a powerful enemy had infiltrated the kingdom. It's my fault. Haha. Do you know who she is now? Her. Edwin immediately reacted, even though he was not absolutely sure. Master, are you talking about Countess Enristo? Duque revealed a mysterious smile. Edwin, do you still remember Lord Presto? In the carriage, the expressions of the other four people froze. Lord Presto, this name was not unfamiliar at all. Even Solarian, who was far away in Cuel Salis, had heard of it. The fallen ancient guardian, Nesario, had once pretended to be a human lord and infiltrated the alliance. He almost married Princess Kalia and was crowned king of Alterac. Chapter 1093. Edwin slapped his forehead in utter regret. This was a slap to his face. After all, he was in charge of the Marcus family's intelligence work. It's not your fault. And risto and presto are very different in pronunciation and spelling. Duque wasn't spouting nonsense. After all, the common language in the world of Azeroth wasn't English. It was still an alphabetic system, but the letters, spelling, and pronunciation weren't the same. Windsor sighed. I'm still thinking about how to dispatch troops if something happens to Stormwind City. But that's a dragon. Mortal force is meaningless. Reggie, don't move your main force. The Blackrock beastmen will run out of the burning steppes and cause trouble soon. I'll leave those guys to you. No problem. Windsor patted his chest, his eyes blazing with fighting spirit. He was 38 years old this year, the best age for a man. His martial skills hadn't declined, but he'd experienced 3 battles at the Dark Portal in one go. He was definitely an outstanding commander. Duque smiled. Reggie, fight this battle as the general of Stormwind City. You'll get what you want. Windsor's eyes lit up frighteningly. Of course he knew what Duque was talking about, the martial scepter. A marshal who wasn't even 40 years old. Just the thought of it was enough to make him go crazy with excitement. Isn't it just taking care of the Blackrock beastmen? Don't worry. If this was 20 years ago, Duque really wouldn't be able to rest easy. But after experiencing so much, Windsor was definitely trustworthy. Edwin brought the topic back again. Who's coming this time? A female? Female? Could it be Onyxia? That's right. Too bad there's no prize. What do we do? While she's still in human form, let's. Vanessa made a throat-slitting gesture. Duque laughed. Stop joking. Only when you cut her with your dagger will you realize that her seemingly delicate neck is actually 3 feet thick. TSK, are all giant dragons monsters? Vanessa was indignant. Science could not explain why a giant dragon that weighed in tons would turn into a delicate woman that weighed less than 100 pounds after using the ultimate transformation spell. What else could Duque say about such a fantastical world? Solarian interrupted, then what do we do? Should he just wait like this? It doesn't seem to fit. Master's personality. Solarian hadn't completely changed. After all, she hadn't spent much time with Duque. Duque didn't mind. He rested his chin on his left hand and rested his elbow on his knee. His right index finger tapped on the blue-dyed velvet cushion about 10 times rhythmically and smiled. Solarian, you're right. Although waiting is in line with my status, the status of a mortal is meaningless to a dragon. At this point, a naughty smile appeared on Duque's face. But since such a giant dragon doesn't play violence with us, and instead comes to the human world to play politics and conspiracy, wouldn't it be rude of us as the host not to play with her? Vanessa pursed her lips. Dear Master, are you sure that Alun has cleansed you of all evil powers? Damn it, Master is working, don't talk as a maid. Edwin couldn't stand watching his daughter anymore. After lecturing her, he immediately turned to Duque. Master, you spoil Vanessa too much. She's almost forgotten her duty as a maid. Duque shrugged. Yes, Master. Are you planning to destroy the entire noble class? Windsor suddenly asked. After all, every knight apprentice is taught how to serve their lord when they are young. Only by making great contributions will they be allowed to enter the noble class and rise above the rest. If Master does this, with our power and power, we should be able to succeed. But there will be chaos, and who will rule the country in the future? Or do you want to change Stormwind to a Dalajan parliamentary system? Or a monarchical parliamentary system like in Quell, the Loss? Sigh. Duque sighed. So that's the case? This was the inevitable limitation of the people of this era. Due to the lack of productivity and poor transportation, the human kingdoms of Azeroth where Duque had transmigrated were similar to the feudal system of medieval Europe. It was simple. It would take more than a month to send an order to the furthest border. The scope of the king's authority was usually limited to his field of vision. He couldn't control anything beyond a 3-day journey, so he had to give his vassals great autonomy. Every lord was in fact a local emperor. But Duque used 20 years to promote the mechanical revolution with the steam engine as the core, and almost covered the entire territory of Stormwind. It would take less than a week to travel from Stormwind to the furthest territory. Access to roads, access to money, access to government orders. Maintaining the more primitive feudal system under such circumstances was actually hindering the development of the entire society. For example, this time, the princess of the Black Dragon Onyxia had just provoked a little, and the brainless nobles who were blinded by profits couldn't wait to jump out. On the surface, they wanted to increase taxes, but in reality, they wanted more power. Otherwise, they would threaten to abolish the railway transportation. This situation was even worse than when Onyxia provoked the Mason Brotherhood to demand back pay from the Stormwind nobles for the construction of Stormwind City. That time, the Stormwind nobles didn't pay for the construction of the city. It was a typical peasant worker demanding back pay. Of course, there was also the reason why Onyxia lied to the backbone of the Mason Brotherhood. She asked them to falsify accounts and raise the construction costs to demand money from the Stormwind nobles. The problem was that at that time, the nobles were also very poor. Naturally, the nobles thought that this was extortion. Under the Princess of the Black Dragon's provocation, the Mason Brotherhood rioted. The mole she arranged even threw stones at Varian's queen, Tiffany, to death. Varian, who knew that he was in the wrong, was still extremely lenient and exiled the Mason Brotherhood instead of starting a massacre. As a result, the Defias Brotherhood came into being. In this life, because of Duque's influence, the resources in Stormwind were extremely abundant, and the people were extremely happy. It was very difficult to incite conflict between the people and the nobles, so the nobles fought with Bolvar for power. Who would have thought that Duque would return at such a crucial time? Duque didn't want to cause too much chaos, but since Onyxia had started it, he could only carry on with the reform. Chapter 1094. Duque pondered for a moment before replying, "I have no intention of disbanding the entire noble class. To be honest, a ruler is a necessary existence. Without a ruler, the people will be in chaos. But what I, and even the entire world, need is a group of rulers who are united and actively preparing for war to face the Burning Legion and other dark forces, not maggots who dare to attack the soldiers on the front line for their own interests." "My lord, what else did you see in the River of Time?" Windsor asked. "War. Not only against the Burning Legion and the Scourge Legion, but also against the ancient elemental lords and the most evil ancient gods. Every 2 to 3 years, there will be a great battle similar to the Third Dark Portal." Duke tricked his subordinates like a charlatan. If Duque had said this 20 years ago, he would have been treated as an idiot. But humans were a race with amazing adaptability. In these 20 years, everyone had gotten used to it. No one did not believe him. Although they believed it, the expressions of the 4 people in the carriage turned serious. "Understood. Let us do what we can for our Lord. Let us pave a bright path for this world full of calamities." With Windsor in the lead, the 4 of them bowed to Duque. On the other side, the Storm nobles began to contact each other as soon as the meeting ended. However, they sadly found that they could not find anyone on their side, or even a team that could contend against Duke Marcus' tyranny. At this time, they were pleasantly surprised to find that someone had committed a crime. Countess Katrana and Risto had suddenly announced that there would be a masquerade party tonight. Yes. The kind that wore a mask and did not even need to show their faces. The Countess was so considerate that she specifically instructed the person who delivered the invitation to verbally convey that they did not even recognize the family emblem on the carriage, they only recognized the invitation and not the person. From the most powerful dukes to the insignificant barons, at least 200 to 300 nobles directly agreed to attend the banquet. Bolvar was silent for a long time when he received the news. In the shadows in front of him stood a shadowy man. He was short and capable, with deep brown eyes. "Your Excellency, what should we do?" In the end, Bolvar waved his hand. "I have already reached an agreement with Regent Marcus. I will not interfere in this matter. Moreover, doing so would obviously help the Stormwind Kingdom become a more powerful nation. You just need to focus on the Ghost Wolf mission. Understood. The man silently retreated. Looking at the empty room, Bolvar sighed. Duque, don't disappoint me. That night, the atmosphere was strange. As the sky gradually darkened, almost all the noble houses opened their doors, and many carriages streamed out. Some of these carriages had family emblems, while others were unemblemished carriages used by servants to purchase goods. More than 4 figures of carriages poured onto the streets at once. Even when Stormwind City was being rebuilt, Duque had designed all the main roads in the city plan to allow 6 carriages to travel side by side. The main road that ran through the entire city was even more exaggerated, with 12 lanes. However, when thousands of carriages came out at the same time in a premeditated manner, the traffic inevitably fell into chaos. If MI7 attempted to follow some of the major nobles, they were bound to go crazy, because they simply did not have enough manpower to follow every carriage and figure out who was sitting inside. However, the nobles quickly fell into doubt. Logically speaking, they would at least attract a large number of stalkers by openly confusing the line of sight. For example, there were only a few dozen elite thieves in MI7, and the rest were ordinary peripheral members. There were only about 500 of them. Moreover, with less than 1,000 thieves scattered throughout Stormwind's vast territory, apart from the Marcus family's territory, which might have fewer people, there should be at least 30 to 40 people in each district, right? The number of thieves that could really be mobilized in Stormwind City would not exceed 200. But there was not a single stalker. The nobles who wanted to participate in the masquerade party arrived without a hitch. They were not worried about being questioned by the 2 regents. The powerful guys had either prepared a substitute, or a few of them claimed to be playing cards together, with a group of loyal servants helping them to falsely testify. Entering Countess Anristo's magnificent manor in the east of Stormwind City that was comparable to a duke's mansion, the nobles could hear the cheerful music coming from the huge and glorious villa from afar. A band composed entirely of high elves played the most popular music from the time of Cuel Salus. Sometimes cheerful, sometimes passionate, and sometimes decadent, it constantly tugged at the heartstrings of the nobles. If it wasn't for the fact that what happened today was too big, perhaps at this moment, many young noble men and women would have run to the bushes around the villa to roll around. Although it was called a masquerade party, in fact, it could only deceive outsiders. Nobles who were familiar with each other would always recognize the decorative secret codes that the other party deliberately left on their bodies. Seeing the familiar big shots arriving one by one, the young nobles were ecstatic. In their eyes, this was already enough to overthrow the whole kingdom, and even that damn Grand Duke Marcus was exiled. Unfortunately, after the banquet began, the atmosphere was very strange. Because everyone saw that the heroine of the masquerade party, Countess Anristo, who only wore a small golden mask that covered her eyes, actually ignored the other nobles and danced with a young noble under the accompaniment of music. Even the nobles close by could not hear what the two were whispering. Fortunately, they did not hear it. If they heard it, they would probably be scared out of their wits. Dear Grand Duke Marcus, I don't remember sending you an invitation. Yes. That's right. At this moment, the person dancing with the Countess was Duque, who was wearing a ridiculous high elf mask. Of course, no one in this world would know that the 2 metal accessories on the mask's ears were a small version of the Dragon Salyer. There was also a line of Chinese written on it, Dragon Salyer, click to send. The evil Duque gently held the slender hand of the humanoid black dragon princess with one hand, enjoying the soft touch. At the same time, his other hand unscrupulously hugged her waist. Yes, from time to time, his hand would slip a little. Every time he felt the faint anger from the princess, he would put on an expression of, my hand slipped, I'm sorry. I like crowds the most, and I have the habit of never letting go of my favorite things. Chapter 1095. Hee hee. You're really confident. Onyxia had a formal smile on her face. Of course. As an expert and a leader, confidence was a must. That's because you might not win with confidence, but you'll definitely lose without confidence, Duque teased without showing any weakness. Hearing this, the Black Dragon Princess laughed coldly in her heart. Hee hee. If you knew who I was, would you still be so confident? She didn't know that Duque was also laughing coldly in his heart. Hee hee hee. If you knew that I already knew who you were, would you still be so calm? Would you pretend that you didn't know and continue playing politics with me among the nobles? Or would you flip the table on the spot and turn into a black dragon and start fighting? Just like that, the human and the dragon looked at each other gently and even affectionately in the eyes of others. No one knew that these two fellows couldn't wait to kill each other. Onyxia laughed. Is this the confidence of the legendary Casanova Duke who conquered many queens? The Black Dragon Princess suddenly thought maliciously. If one day, Duque found out that the beauty he was very interested in was actually a black dragon, and then she would attack him violently and bite off both of his legs, how cruel and hilarious the scene would be. Maybe, maybe not. Duke's face was full of smiles as he continued to display the demeanor of a Casanova. While he was replying, he was thinking about how to numb Onyxia so that her plan wouldn't be carried out so quickly. He had to give Onyxia hope and not let her fall out so quickly. Otherwise, William would be in danger, or it might directly lead to the failure of the training, and he wouldn't be able to form the legendary Iron Triangle with Valilla and Eyebrawl. However, Duque couldn't let Onyxia stay in Stormwind City for too long. In his spatial storage, there was a remnant of a platinum disc that only had 1/5 of its original size left. It was trembling faintly. With the help of the platinum disc's power, Duque had already seen that the entire villa was filled with Dragonians and half-dragons. It had to be said that the Black Dragon clan's ultimate transformation technique was very powerful. Duque wondered maliciously if those idiotic nobles knew that the waiters who were pouring wine for them, as well as the beautiful maidservants with big breasts and fair skin whom the young nobles could not even blink, were all draconids with the appearance of black-skinned lizards. What concerned Duque the most was the system elf's label on Onyxia. It wasn't strange to have a leader's mark with a white skull on a black background. What was strange was that Onyxia's mark was orange. An orange name meant that the other party's strength was much higher than his, so it was not advisable to fight him. Huh? System elf, are you kidding me? Don't I already have the platinum disc? Why is it still orange? Duque secretly asked the system in the spiritual world. The possibility of an incorrect judgment is 0.2%. According to speculation, Onyxia, who has transformed into a human, has received an unknown enhancement. Unknown strengthening, huh? Duque muttered to himself. Of course, in the eyes of the Black Dragon Princess, it meant something else. Pitiful humans, can't get rid of the shackles of tradition after all? I thought you were really so ruthless that you wanted to subvert the traditions of the entire human society. Onyxia smiled. Grand Duke Marcus, in fact, I am very grateful for your concern. But you are not my type, I prefer a more traditional man. Duque was embarrassed. Am I being labeled as a good guy? Hey. I haven't done anything yet. No, my affection for you is just a pretense, you don't have to label me, okay? At this moment, Duque, who considered himself not handsome, but elegant and invincible in the field of love, felt 100,000 tons of damage in his heart. But, the act had to continue. Tradition is essentially a good thing, but tradition must also adapt to the changes of the times. Don't you think that a great man like me, who has adapted to the development of the new era, is a better choice for you? Duque smiled, hinting with a double meaning. On the surface, he was picking up girls, but in fact, he was hinting that holding on to the traditions of feudal territories would not end well. Onyxia was a rare dragon with a high level of political wisdom. She immediately determined that Duque was actually trying to recruit her. The Black Dragon Princess sneered inwardly, hee. It turns out that the great hero Duque, who even dared to kill my dead father, is actually afraid of a civil war in Stormwind? Humans' shackles to their homeland and oaths to the dead are boring enough. But it is precisely like this that he is more like a human. Hee. Duke Marcus, just wait for me to thoroughly destroy your cherished Stormwind. Onyxia was not feigning civility, but a decisive refusal. Her voice suddenly became slightly louder, loud enough for a few nobles nearby to hear. I believe that it is precisely because of the inheritance of civilization and norms that humans can be distinguished from the barbaric beastmen, filthy trolls, and other races, and become recognized as a highly intelligent race. Humans who have abandoned their inheritance are no different from beasts, so give up. Rather than lowering my noble head and kneeling in the mud under your despotism, I will choose to use my own method to say no to injustice and tyranny. Onyxia's words were so righteous and awe-inspiring. If Duze didn't know that the person in front of him was a female black dragon, even he himself would have almost believed it. He even shed a few tears of gratitude. A dragon's life is like a play, and it all depends on acting skills. Alright, your black dragon family is a best actor and best actress. I will carve the word admire on a sweet potato when I return. Duque showed a pitiful expression. It's such a pity that Countess Anristo has such a deep prejudice against me. I hope that time can bridge the gap between us. Some scars cannot be healed by time, Best Actress Onyxia replied coldly. Just in time, the song ended. Duque could only reluctantly let go of Onyxia. Of course, as a big antagonist to the nobles, how could he not leave some harsh words before he left? Is that so? Actually, when it comes to persuasion, I personally prefer conquest. Let's call it a day. I think we will have a deeper conversation in the council hall. Yes, we will. Unknowingly, a large group of nobles had stood behind the countess. Now everyone knew that it was Duque who came to demonstrate his power. But some things were like this. After shedding all pretenses of cordiality, they would become fearless. It was precisely because of Duque's appearance that more wavering nobles began to join Countess Anristo's camp. It was all because of Duque. Leaving the villa in a carefree manner, Duque really wanted to laugh. If the flag bearer they followed was really a human, perhaps there would be a Stormwind version of Joan of Arc. Unfortunately, they followed a female black dragon. Chapter 1096. Just like that, under the murderous gazes of countless nobles and a large number of Dragonians who were ostensibly servants, Duque strode away unhurriedly. He even threw off the mask on his face and revealed his true face. He turned around and smiled mysteriously at the nobles who had followed him to the gate. This, of course, was met with a wave of exclamations and sighs. Even if this was a declaration of war, even if Duque had completely stood on the opposite side of the traditional nobles, the boldness of going deep into the enemy's territory alone still made the nobles gasp in admiration. In the eyes of the nobles, Countess Katrana Anristo also stood with her head held high and chest out. She stood at the gate and raised her slender and beautiful hand, and the last piece of golden mask that covered her face suddenly flew into the sky. Two pairs of black eyes that were as deep and mysterious as the universe shot out divine lights and collided passionately in the air. Although Du Peng wanted to describe it as a kitchen knife cutting through a wire, but in the eyes of the nobles, this was a spectacular scene of tigers and wolves staring at each other. They were excited. The traditional nobles finally had a standard-bearer at this moment. A standard-bearer who was not afraid of the evil Duke Marcus's monstrous power and strength. Beautiful Lady Katrana. You are not fighting alone. You are not alone. More and more nobles stood behind Katrana, who was like a saintess descending to the world. Some nobles even pinned their family insignia. Even though they had not taken off their masks, they were standing on the side. The ridiculous herd mentality was fully displayed at this moment. Almost every noble was thinking, that's right. I am a great noble conferred by the late king. As long as I do not commit treason, no one can confiscate my territory. I am the master of my territory. If you, Duque, forcibly take away our power, then be prepared for a civil war. Looking at the large army of nobles, Duque almost laughed until his stomach cramped. After snorting, Duque turned around and no longer looked in the direction of the villa. At the gate, a gorgeous carriage with a blue and white background and the Marcus family's tornado family emblem rushed over at high speed. With an almost elegant movement, the carriage stopped in front of Duque. The driver was one of the famous 5 silver sages, Gavin misfortune. This holy knight, who had once been exiled to the outside world and was now a Grand Marshal of both Stormwind and the Alliance, had just been confirmed to be alive. He, Daneth Trollbane, and Kale, had successfully built a bridgehead fortress not far from the Hellfire Peninsula where the Dark Portal was located, Fort Glory. However, the space near the Door of Darkness was too unstable. It was only with Kale, full strength, that he managed to return a week ago. As soon as he returned, he used this method to express his support for Duque. "Ha! It's really unfair for a marshal like you to be my driver." Duque smiled. "It would be my honor to be the driver for the Alliance's commander." Gavin smiled as well. Duque entered the carriage with large strides. Naturally, there were his two maids who were very good at fighting, as well as Edwin. Defan, who was supposed to be the leader of the Defias Brotherhood, could not help but ask, "Is it really good to leave them alone?" "No problem, let the bullets fly for a while." What Duque said was a famous saying from that world. In the ears of the other three, there was naturally an unusual taste. Dwarves were good with guns, so they naturally had bullets. In the eyes of mortals, as long as the gun was fine and the target was aimed, it would hit. In the eyes of experts, even the fastest bullet was nothing more than a flying tool. Shields deflecting bullets, godly evasion, muscles clamping bullets, these were really nothing. This was the difference between realms. A difference that was enough to make others feel deep respect. Unknowingly, Solarian had been Duque's maid for 5 years. Even though Duque was thrown into the War of the Ancients most of the time and kept busy, this did not stop Solarian from finding opportunities to understand her master. Solarian had originally thought that since Duque had chosen to save Kale, the prince she had followed before, she had to fulfill her promise. Everything was out of a promise and obligation. As she learned more about Duque's past, she began to understand why so many people around Duque followed Duque without any complaints or regrets. Even though Duque was not around, they still firmly carried out the policies that Duque had left behind. They firmly believed and looked forward to Duque's return. Perhaps, only such a man can truly save this world that is plagued with disasters. Solarian muttered silently in her heart. Duque did not care about Solarian's sensitive thoughts. In his opinion, a human maid who had regained the appearance of an 18-year-old and a beautiful elven maid with a shelf life of tens of thousands of years was enough as eye candy. Duque had deliberately allowed the incident to ferment, and he had this excuse. This was because on January 2nd, year 21 of the Dark Portal, which was the day after New Year's Day, the Alliance would hold a meeting. This meeting was of great significance. It was not only the 20th anniversary of the Alliance, but also to welcome the Night Elves to join the Alliance. And according to the agreement made by the various countries at the end of the Third War of the Dark Portal 5 years ago, the Alliance would no longer have a leader. Instead, a standing leader would be elected every 5 years, and a new Alliance commander and deputy commander would be elected. Last time, because of urgent matters, after Duque returned from the void where Karazhan was, he took the position of Alliance commander for a time. Later, because of the Archimonde curse, he resigned. Now that Duque had returned and announced that he was fine, everyone knew that this was just a formality. The position of Alliance commander would definitely belong to Duque. This was just like when the leaders of the Celestial Empire went on a visit before Duze, and then, conveniently, signed a number of trade contracts. In fact, they had already been signed and negotiated, and only announced at once. Since the birth of the Alliance, there had been a total of 3.5 commanders. The first was Anduin Lothar. He was the least controversial. If it were not for Duque's dazzling achievements, he would probably have been given the title of God of War. The second was Alexandros Mograine. Although he was rigorous in his use of troops, it had been proven many times that his ability was limited to one army. With 200,000 troops, he could give you the effect of 400,000 troops. Give him 400,000 troops, and it was still 400,000. The third was Duque. His dazzling achievements were enough for him to be recognized as the God of War. The only thing that restricted him previously was that he could not get the support of the Rotterdam Kingdom. The remaining half was William, who could be considered an apprentice under Lothar. All the kings knew who the best candidate was. What was more rare was that Duque had started his career early, had the best achievements, and had the best achievements. All the kings respected him. If there were no accidents, Duque could be the commander for at least another 30 years. As long as Duque did not announce that the alliance would become an empire, everyone would respect him. Under such an atmosphere, the leaders of the various countries who arrived at Rotterdam on the 1st of January seemed extremely harmonious. Chapter 1097. During the first years of the Dark Portal, rapid travel through teleportation portals was something unimaginable to most people. With the development of magical technology, directional teleportation portals had been greatly improved in the past 20 years. During the First Alliance Conference, the kings of the various countries had taken ships and carriages to rush to the conference. Now, teleportation portals were all in place. Those who could become the rulers of a country all had to deal with a myriad of issues. As long as it was safe, no one would have the time to waste on the road. In Teldrassil, Tyron's trusted aide Melland was still feeling uneasy. I wonder if the kings of the various countries will give us the cold shoulder now that we've joined the alliance. In fact, the Nature faction had the same worries. Fandral Staghelm even publicly expressed that Tyron's actions were akin to being cold-shouldered. However, the Night Elves were more inclined towards the alliance. After all, on one side was a pleasant-looking fellow, while on the other side was either Bonehead or the green-skinned beast-man who had killed their demigod Cenarius. However, no matter how they thought about it, it was better to actually pay them a visit. I won't. Tyron smiled gently. Yes, Your Excellency High Priest, has anything happened recently? I feel like you're in a good mood, and you're glowing. Is that so? You must be imagining things. Tyron turned her head away, blushing. Time's up. Stepping through the teleportation portal that was opened by the Dalaran wizard who was sent ahead of time, the Night Elves only felt a sense of dizziness. They had not experienced the feeling of space deviation ever since they exiled their compatriots, the Blood Elves who now called themselves Sin Dorii. It was a very short feeling, lasting only a few seconds. By the time they came back to their senses, they were already in a wide passageway that wasn't too long. The portal was less than 10 meters away. Sentinels. Puff out your chests. Melon's idea was to display the might of the Night Elves. Unexpectedly, as soon as they stepped out, a female figure in a blue and white wizard robe quickly walked up to them. Sister Tyrande. We meet again. Her tone was calm, but her actions were passionate. Under the gaze of Melland and the sentinels, the crowned Queen Jaina rushed up and hugged Tyrande. Her actions were extremely intimate, as if they were sisters who had been separated for many years. You're the queen. Pay attention to your image. Although she said it was a reminder, Tyrande's tone was as if she was doting on her own sister. Melland was shocked. She hadn't seen the two of them being so intimate the last time they worked together to kill Arkharon on Mount Hyjal. What the hell happened? Sister, sit in my carriage. Jaina pointed at her royal carriage. Then I'll have to trouble you, sister. Tyrande smiled gently and waved at Melanie, motioning for them to follow her. She then boarded the carriage without hesitation. After all, the mana consumption of the teleportation portal depended on the size and weight of the object being transported. Tyrande did not bring her famous white tiger with her, so she could only rely on the Alliance to provide transportation. With Kurtilas, the queen of the earliest member of the Alliance, leading the way, it was the best way for the Night Elves to integrate into the Alliance. Along the way, Tyrande and Jaina chatted happily in the carriage. Melland and the other sentinels were filled with curiosity. As soon as they arrived at the newly built Lordaeron Palace, they bumped into the Queen of Sin Dorii, Sylvanas, and the Queen of Alterac, Elucia. Without any formal greetings, Elucia came up and gave Tyrande a warm hug. Sister, welcome to the Lordaeron continent. After the meeting, you can come to my South Sea city if you have time. Sylvanas came up and gave her a hug as well. Sister, we meet again. Sylvanas' tone was slightly calmer, but everyone could see that she was friendly towards Tyrande. Elves of two different skin colors, two leaders hugging each other. To the night elves who had been isolated for thousands of years, this was a historic moment. Some of the older night elf sentries felt their noses tingle. The two elves were ultimately of the same origin. It was purely a difference in ideology that caused them to split. Who would have thought that after the ancient war 10,000 years ago, the night elves and blood elves would fight side by side again? Compared to Jaina and Alicia's enthusiasm, Sylvanas was more reserved. She and Tyrande had another topic in common: shooting. Tyrande was a priestess and archer. She was also very skilled in archery. The two strongest archers of this era chatted as they walked side by side. The two queens in front were even more affectionate. Alicia and Jaina were holding hands as they walked as if they were shopping. Behind them, Melanie and the sentries were dumbfounded. As if they had arranged to meet, Duque had arrived with the Windrunner sisters. Duque gestured elegantly. "Tyrande, welcome to Lordaeron. Actually, you've already met the three Windrunner sisters. But please allow me to formally introduce you. Aurelia and Sasha are the leaders of the newly formed organization, Silver Dawn." Doesn't it sound fake? There's no other way. This is an official meeting. Even though they've already met each other sincerely and reached a consensus, they had no choice but to introduce each other in public. Aurelia held Tyrande's hands and said elegantly, "Welcome, Sister Tyrande. Silver Dawn is a civil organization with the High Elves as its core. Its goal is to fight against the Scourge. However, we are directly under the command of the Alliance. If you have any missions against the Scourge, please call us sisters. We'll definitely have many opportunities to interact." Tyrande looked at Duque. Just as she was about to say something, a rough and strong voice suddenly sounded. "Duque, don't mix with the women. Come and drink with me. This time, we'll drink you until you're unconscious and get the good stuff out of your stomach." The two short wintermelons seemed to have rolled over, directly carrying the dumbfounded Duke up and ran. Tyrande gaped. "That's the Dwarven King of Iron Forge, Magni Bronzebeard, and his third brother, Bulang," Aurelia replied. "Don't mind those stinky men. We're having a party tonight. Remember to come." Sasha, who was the most active, whispered into Tyrande's ears. While official negotiations were important when it came to interactions between nations, personal relationships were also important. If one attended the meeting but did not even have a private conversation, then the visit would undoubtedly be a failure. The first and second day were all given to the kings to chat in private. It was obvious that Tyrande was not excluded from the Alliance's circle. Chapter 1098. On the first of the day, Tyrande was busy greeting the leaders of the various countries. Thanks to the battle at Mount Hyjal and her relationship with Durin, they were all on good terms. Of course, the final victor would still be the private gathering at night. At 10 at night, Tyrande arrived at the guest house of Sin Dorii under the protection of sentries. Along the way, not only were there sentries every few steps, but there were also teams of elite guards patrolling the area. There was also a large three-dimensional protective magic formation set up by the arcanists of Sin Dorii. The security was so tight that it left one speechless. Looking at the solemn and nervous expressions of the guards, Melon subconsciously thought that they were about to hold an important meeting that concerned the survival of the world. Seeing how relaxed High Priestess Tyrande looked, holding a thin bag in her left hand and humming a song as she went to the meeting, Melon finally couldn't hold it in anymore. "Sister, is it really okay to be so casual?" As a member of the Alun Sisterhood, this was how they addressed the older and higher priestesses. Tyrande smiled. "Sister, it's fine. I'm really just going to make friends. The tight security is just a trick to fool outsiders." "Really?" Tyrande's casual tone didn't match the solemn atmosphere at all. Under the guidance of the leader of the Blood Elf Paladins, Liadeline, Tyrande and the others finally arrived at the basement of the guest house. In such a secluded place? Could it be a trap? Melland couldn't help but gulp. Just what kind of battle of words was waiting for him in front of him? At the entrance, the stern-faced female guards opened the door. The heavy door creaked open. Suddenly, an unimaginable wave of voices came rushing at them. Catch her. Don't let her get away. The voice giggled. Boo-hoo. You sisters are bullying me. The female voice sounded aggrieved. Jaina, don't use magic. Someone complained. Then Sasha, put away your rubber arrows first. Someone protested. Melland recognized every voice. But Melland didn't dare to confirm it. In the next second, a slender figure in disheveled clothes rushed through the tall, opaque entrance and rushed to the door. Mellander's jaw dropped. This was the famous master of Theramore, Queen Jaina Proudmoore of Kul Tiras. The problem was that Jaina was wearing a silver bra, a translucent light blue nightgown and a pair of silver briefs. Sister Tyrande. Come quickly. The Windrunner's sisters were bullying him. Let's do 3 against 3. Jaina grabbed Tyrande's hand anxiously. In the blink of an eye, a white pillow flew across the air and hit Jaina's head. Jaina immediately let out a whimper that sounded like a small animal. Woo! Then the stitches on the pillow seemed to loosen, and the snow-white velvet inside flew out in all directions. Sure. I will join the battle. Tyrande smiled as she took off her clothes, revealing a body that Melanie could not help but think was perfect no matter how many times she looked at it. She then put on a white nightgown. Tyrande, who had always looked holy and noble, turned to look at her confidant with a reproachful expression. What are you looking at? Have you never seen a slumber party or a pillow fight before? Melander was stunned. Sister, this is a custom passed down from the humans. Tyrande chuckled as she threw a pillow back at Melander. This time, it was Sasha who hugged her head and whimpered. It was hard to describe Melander's current embarrassment. But, this was probably a good thing. Sister, have fun. Melander said almost subconsciously. Yes, I will. Come and get me when the sun rises. With that, Tyrande threw another pillow that could twist and turn at Savannah's, who was dodging at high speed. The heavy door slowly closed. Melander stood there in a daze as if he had just seen a new world. After a long while, he asked Riataline, do all the queens of the Alliance like to play like this? Riataline put her hands on her hips and sighed. Of course not. This is a small circle that you don't know about. Poor Queen Kalia couldn't get in even after waiting for 20 years. Melander was confused. Regardless, Melander still felt happy for Tyrande. As someone close to her, she knew how Tyrande had lived for the past 10,000 years. Politically, she had to exile her fellow High Elves and face Fandrel's provocations. Privately, she had rejected the Stormrage brothers because of that incident. Although Tyrande's face was always filled with warmth and kindness, she had never been happy on the inside. It had been a long time since she had seen her happy. What happened to Tyrande? Why did she suddenly change after a trip to the gushing spring lake? What she didn't know was that Duque, the key person in this matter, was about to vomit. F***ck, I should never have taught the method of distilling liquor to those damn dwarves. The drunken Duque looked at the corpses of the 4 dwarves in the hall of the Steel Stove Castle State Guesthouse, Magni, Kudrin, Jerban, and Bulang. Duque was furious. His boss was drunk, so someone had to clean up the mess. The guards of the Steel Stove Castle came in and dragged their boss away as if they were used to it. On Duque's side, a maid came to his rescue. Master. According to you, you're asking for it. Vanessa spat out her poisonous tongue. Ugh, send me back to the Storm State Guesthouse. Aurelia and the others are having a pajama party. Vanessa purposely provoked Duque. Duque imagined it. It was a scene that could reach the level of killing a virgin. But not now. That bastard Magni saw that he couldn't win with just one type of wine, so he mixed it with another. In the end, even if Duque won, it was a Pyrrhic victory. Those vodka-like things had been specially added with some kind of bubble drink. Once he drank it, the smell of alcohol would rush to his head. Even though Duque had used all his magic circuits and had the system elf help his body detoxify, his combat ability was still reduced by more than half. Asking Duque to go there now was like sending himself to his death. Duque shook his head like a rattle drum. Be good. Be good and send me back to the guest house. Okay. Vanessa agreed. But in a place where Duque didn't notice, Vanessa smiled as if she had succeeded. Groggy, Duque first went to the toilet to vomit. Then, he let Vanessa help him wipe his body and fell on the bed like a dead dog. System elf, other than those on the safety list, if anyone else comes near, you have to wake me up even if you use electric shock. Understood. Don't worry, host. Chapter 1099. Ugh, the feeling of a hangover was terrible. His head was splitting, and he clearly wanted to sleep, but he couldn't. He breathed heavily into the room, and the stench of alcohol made him want to vomit. Unfortunately, he had already vomited everything he could, and the rest had entered his blood vessels. He could only hope for his liver to break down more alcohol enzymes so that he could sober up faster. In a daze, Duque noticed that someone was touching him. The system genie showed a green light. That meant he was on the same side. Duque didn't care. Anyway, he was a weakling now, and he was counting on others to serve him. That person took advantage of the darkness to come up, and her soft little hands groped him. Then, Duque realized that she seemed to be using armor break on him. Don't worry about me. Let me sleep. Huff. The other party seemed to be startled, but then came a mosquito-like reply, okay. Wait. Something seemed wrong. Although his body's senses were rather slow, Duque could still feel the strange touch when the other party was gently and carefully sharpening Duque's godly sword. Duque forced his heavy eyelids open and saw a blonde head. Without long ears, was it a human? The only blonde human female around him was Jaina, but Jaina definitely didn't have this kind of hair that reached her waist. Duque suddenly woke up. He finally saw who it was and cried out involuntarily, Kalia. Like a stupid thief who had been caught stealing for the first time, Kalia froze, completely at a loss for what to do. However, in the next moment, 2 lines of tears rushed out of Kalia's eyes and slid down her still elegant cheeks. If it's me. Can't I do anything? Duque, do you hate me that much? The moonlight shone into the room, making Kalia's bright blonde hair shine. Time passed, but the years still left traces on the face and body of this once beautiful princess. Under the moonlight, there were already some crow's feet at the corners of Kalia's eyes. Kneeling at the end of the bed, her unreserved female body was full of the traces of a mature woman. Sitting up, Duque suddenly sighed, it's been 20 years. That's right. It had been 20 years. From the very beginning, when they first met, there were a few short but interesting conversations. Then, he helped Kalia fake her death. Then, 5 years ago, when Arthas killed his father, he forced Kalia to return to Lordaeron to ascend to the throne. It had been 20 years since then. Actually, ever since Duque found out from Vanessa that Kalia refused to use his eternal blessing, Duque knew Kalia's decision. Returning to her youth was seen by her as a breakup gift, but Kalia refused to accept it. Therefore, she would rather appear in front of Duque in her youthful appearance. Her tears were still flowing, causing Duque's heart to ache. Yeah. It's been 20 years, but in these 20 years, I've never regretted even for a second. Kalia's voice was still crisp and soft. It was like an awl that pierced straight into Duque's heart. Duque's mouth moved for a long time, and he let out a long sigh. You're so silly. I've always done those things purely because I don't want the heavens to destroy your beauty. Leaning over lightly, Kalia sat on Duque's knees, and put her hands on Duque's shoulders. So what? The only one who saved me from that cage called the palace was Duque. The only one who gave me the most regretless youth, and let me enjoy 10 years of freedom that I couldn't even dream of, was Duque. Maybe in your eyes, I'm just a passerby. But in my eyes, you're all I have. So, even if I don't want to return to Lordaeron, as long as it's your wish, I'll do it. Duque was silent. Kalia's forehead gently touched Duque's forehead, and her tears flowed even more. I'm sorry. I know that you like the Windrunner sisters the most, and I know that you don't like me, but I really like you too much, and I love you too much. In the beginning, I was willing to wait silently. But you accidentally went away for 10 years, and immediately after you came back, there was a fierce battle, and then you disappeared for more than 4 years. What else could Duque say? He was also very helpless. It was always the void, or the river of time. If sorry works, I'm willing to say it 100,000 times, 1,000,000 times. But I really don't want to lie to myself anymore, and wait like a fool. I've waited for 20 years, and I really can't accept that I won't have any emotional interaction with you in the future, and that I'll end my life like this. So, even if what I'm going to do next is wrong, please forgive me, okay? After saying that, Kalia wanted to act recklessly. Who knew that Duque would suddenly push her away? Kalia was extremely shocked. Weren't you drugged? Needless to ask, it must be someone close to him who was a spy. He shouldn't have let Vanessa stay by Kalia's side in the first place. Damn it, a good maid has become bad. Duque's face twitched. Damn it, Vanessa, you bastard maid, I'll deal with you later. In the maid's room outside the door, even though the soundproofing was good, Vanessa, who was not asleep, suddenly felt a chill. Turning back, Duque fiercely looked at Kalia. Idiot woman. You even gave up your last chance to escape from my clutches. Don't blame the world for your stupidity. You're finished, just wait to become my collection for eternity. After Duque's malicious words, Kalia's tears turned into laughter. Good. I've waited for this day for 20 years. Take this, watch my throat slash. Duque's godly sword stabbed forward, and the cruel sword edge instantly pierced through. Kalia was like a swan that had been shot by a sharp arrow. Her long and perfect neck was stretched to the limit because of the pain, and the tears that had already been gushing out were like a broken dam. But this time, they were tears of joy. At the same time, because of the pain, her throat seemed to be sealed, and she could not say a single word. That's right, Duque was indeed very rough, but for a woman who was crazy for love and was willing to throw herself at him like a moth to a flame, for a woman who had waited for 20 years and was not willing to wait for even a second more was torture. This was just right. Duque. 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 Duque, du-ku. Kalia seemed to want to pour out the feelings that had accumulated in her heart for 20 years. She did not do anything, but cried out Duque's name the whole time. Unknowingly, it was dawn. Duque, that eternal blessing, I'd better use it. Otherwise, I won't have confidence in front of those beautiful sisters who won't age. Yes. Chapter 1100. On the 2nd of January, Queen Kalia suddenly summoned the ministers of the Rotterdam kingdom urgently. A large number of nobles looked at the radiant queen on the throne in astonishment, completely speechless. In order to avoid suspicion, Duque asked Kalia to ingest the blessing of eternal life in stages. The changes would not be too obvious in a short period of time. However, just because her appearance did not change did not mean that her spirit did not change. The old ministers, Mograine and Abendis, knew that the queen had not been happy in the past few years. However, they had no choice. Kalia was the only legitimate heir of the royal family. If they did not support her to ascend the throne, all the people of the Rotterdam kingdom would be like wandering ghosts. They would lose their loyalty and cohesion. That was a deep-rooted concept that had been rooted in this land for 2,800 years and had been passed down for countless generations. Since the day the queen ascended the throne, the old ministers had been worried about the continuation of the royal bloodline. Even though there were countless young nobles in the country who had launched an emotional attack on Queen Kalia, they were all chased away and killed. Everyone knew that Queen Kalia only had one him in her heart. The problem was that although that guy was good, no one knew where he had died all year round. Besides, he had a few queens who had an unclear relationship with him. The people of the Rotterdam Kingdom could accept an extremely powerful husband, but they would never accept their queen running off to be a lover. Alright, Queen Kalia, who had been frowning and forcing a smile since Lin Li's disappearance, suddenly changed 180 degrees today. Considering the news of Lin Li's visit, Mograine and Abendus looked at each other, and saw the same answer in each other's eyes. Sigh, still unable to escape from Duque's clutches? Queen Kalia said, once upon a time, I also thought that noble bloodline was everything. Obviously, this thinking is wrong. The great commander of the alliance, Duke Marcus, once said something that I deeply agree with: people are noble because of their great deeds, not because of their bloodline. The queen's words caused a commotion among the ministers. They were too embarrassed to interrupt the queen because she had not finished speaking. True nobles, such as Anjouan Lothar, have the noblest sentiments and the grandest thoughts. When he discovered that Thoradin the Great's bloodline was a restriction to the various human kingdoms, and even to the growing number of races in the alliance, he decisively chose to end the noblest bloodline in his own hands. As for the despicable, even if they have the so-called noble bloodline, just like my brother Arthas who killed my father, King Tyrrhenus, they will also do things that will anger the gods. The mention of Arthas was an eternal pain in the hearts of all the people of Rotterdam. He killed his father and annihilated all the nobles and citizens of the Rotterdam city. He even spread the plague and death throughout most of the Rotterdam Kingdom's territory. If it weren't for the fact that the various countries had suffered great losses and were unable to go on an expedition to Northrend, the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom would have long gone to take revenge. Now that Kalia said that Arthas was a despicable person with a noble bloodline, it was really hard to refute. Especially when Kalia said this as the only heir of the Menethil royal family, no one dared to object. Queen Kalia stood up. She seemed to have some difficulty moving, but her beautiful appearance combined with her righteousness made her soft voice sound powerful. 2,800 years ago, my ancestor opened up the then barren Tirisful forest for the humans, so he was honored as king from the leader of a clan. 2,800 years later, Arthas was stripped of his right to be king because of his heinous crimes. With history as a mirror, only people with both talent and virtue are qualified to be king. So if there is such a day, someone more suitable than me to lead Rotterdam appears, even if his surname is not Menethil, Kalia Menethil, will not be stingy with my throne. I will abdicate. The words of a king were an oath that was thousands of times more serious than a nail on a board. In a sense, Kalia's words were like opening a Pandora's box with her own hands. For people who were greedy for power, this was undoubtedly asking for trouble. But everyone knew that Kalia had said more than once that she did not want to be queen. This was completely forcing a duck onto a perch. If it was not Duque looking for her, but someone else, she would definitely not be willing to come back. It was originally like this in history. It was only when the Burning Legion's universe fleet played large-scale landing battles around Azeroth that Kalia, who had been missing for almost 30 years, resolutely came out of seclusion and participated in this war against evil. Mograine and Abendus sighed. 2 days ago, they heard that Duque was in Stormwind City against the nobles and wanted to implement large-scale reforms. They did not expect Kalia to be the first to take the lead to support Duque today. Think about it, even the queen of the old powerful Rotterdam took the lead to announce that only sages could be kings. What right did the small nobles in the south have to cling to the so-called aristocratic regulations from 2,800 years ago? This was simply a slap in the face to the nobles of Stormwind City. Kalia did not give the nobles of Rotterdam any room to refute, and directly announced the end of the meeting. One could imagine that the wave of sages being kings that would be set off next would sweep through the entire human world. After the meeting, Kalia quickly went to the side hall. Jaina was already waiting at the door. Sister Kalia. Sister Jaina. The two queens hugged each other intimately. They had been best friends since they were very young. After all, they were both princesses and were close in age. But later, as Jaina was married to Duque by King Theron and left for the Elven Forest, the two had no choice but to alienate each other. Unexpectedly, after a big circle, they were back together again. Jaina brought Kalia into the side hall. Only then did Kalia realize that the queens and leaders were already there. Seeing Kalia's awkward walk, Jaina snickered and laughed maliciously. Speaking of which, Duque is a big jerk. He had to torment us human girls. The three of us were going to chase him. Elves are all very loving. That's not it. He wasn't gentle to me at all. I insisted that I didn't want him, but he still bullied me regardless and forced me to learn those shameful things. The pure and holy Tyron seemed to be reminiscing as she held her face in her hands. The other six were shocked. As the high priestess of the moon goddess, Tyron had turned into a female chauffeur. When she suddenly started racing, a pure girl like Kalia could not afford to be hurt. Elysia could only change the topic in embarrassment. But, is it really okay for you to do this? I'm immortal. I'm not a talented person. If I take the throne, there might be all sorts of bad things that will happen. Why don't you take advantage of the fact that Mograine and the other old ministers are still here to arrange things and find a chance to retire? Chapter 1101. Not every queen was like Kalia, who said to let go and then let go. It had nothing to do with greed for power. It was purely determined by one's ability and personality. Kalia did not have any special talents. She was not strong in battle, and she was not as good at internal affairs as Elysia. However, she was more suitable to be a spiritual leader than anyone else. Since her ability was at the level of a mascot, she might as well retire early and have a peaceful life. Otherwise, without external protection, she would get into trouble sooner or later while sitting on the throne. She would either become a puppet or lose her life due to a betrayal. At that moment, Duque came in. Seeing the harmonious atmosphere, he rubbed his nose in embarrassment. The throne meeting is about to begin. Everyone, get ready. Just as he was about to run, Queen Sylvanas suddenly put a hand on Duque's shoulder. Feeling guilty, Duque was immediately petrified. I swear I won't add any more sisters for you. Duque surrendered first. Pfft. Sasha burst out laughing. Second sister, you scared him. The others in the harem also smiled. Only Kalia buried her face in Jaina's chest, not daring to look at anyone. Queen Sylvanas could not even be angry. She put her hands on her hips. No. We discussed it all night at the pajama party and came to a conclusion. What conclusion? Queen Sylvanas seemed to have lost her temper. I really don't know if you did it on purpose or not. We sisters are either queens or leaders. Most of us are so busy that we don't have time to accompany you all day. None of us can let go of our careers or our people. And the world is getting more and more dangerous, so we can only let you take advantage of us, you little bastard. Unknowingly, these beauties had gathered around Duque. Their beautiful eyes wandered, and finally landed on the oldest Tyrant. Tyron smiled. Duque, you are someone who can do great things. Perhaps the safety of the entire world of Azeroth rests on your shoulders. Since we are willing to follow you, we do not want to burden you anymore. Instead of crushing you to the point where you can't breathe, it's better to let go and let you soar freely. Aurelia, who was the first to become Duque's woman, said, yes. We have an agreement, as long as you make all the sisters happy first. Do as you wish. Although Dumuk was touched, his facial muscles were still twitching. An infinite harem sounds great, doesn't it? However, the prerequisite was that he had to please all of these ladies. Only then would he be able to increase his happiness by one. Duque suddenly felt that one of Gu Tianla's words was very true. A man's energy is limited. But the number of girls in this world was limitless. Using a limited amount of energy to bombard an unlimited amount of girls, this in itself is a losing battle. If he continued to act recklessly, he would only be finding trouble for himself. Duque spoke righteously and with the aura of an honest and reliable young master. He raised 3 fingers and said, "I swear." Before they could make their vows, the heavens suddenly sent a bolt of lightning from the clear sky, as if a group of fellow Taoists were going through a tribulation. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. After a while, there was a downpour, followed by sleet and snow. Even Tyrant, who looked so serious, laughed, not to mention the other younger ladies. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. Sasha, who had the most carefree personality, laughed so hard that her stomach hurt. She laughed so hard that she almost choked on her breath. She stopped teasing Duque. According to their ages, first Tyrant, then the 3 Windrunner sisters, followed by Alicia, Kalia, and Jaina. All of them came up to him and gave him hot kisses. No more, no less. It was as if they were on a stopwatch, each kiss lasting 10 seconds. These people were all immortal or long-lived races that could easily live for more than 10,000 years. For example, Tyrant received Teldrassil's blessing when she was 3,000 years old, and her age was frozen until recently. The first 100 years of an elf's life were considered their childhood, and the last 100 years were considered their old age. The rest of the time in between was considered their youth. Therefore, even the oldest Tyrant and Aurelia were only about 25 years old by human standards. Looking at such a harem, Duque was so happy that he almost fainted. Duque's moral integrity was very full, except when he was dissatisfied. There's nothing wrong with that. When Tyrant privately brought up how to solve the beastman's logging problem, Duque patted his chest and promised to leave it to him. That night, there was a formal welcome banquet. At the same time, it was announced that the Night Elves had officially joined the Alliance, and a grand ceremony was held. The Candlelight Club spent 4 years in this city, using a full set of mechanical equipment to fill in the ruins of Lordaeron. They then rebuilt Lordaeron by the lake to the west of the ruins, and held a grand bonfire party. Music could be heard everywhere, and the streets were filled with joyful and joyous Alliance people. During the throne meeting on the 3rd of January, the decision to let Duque, who had been cleansed of his curse, return to being the Alliance's commander was unanimously approved. At the same time, in order to deal with the possible crisis of the Burning Canyon and Burning Steppes, the Iron Furnace Fort would be the Alliance's leader for the next 5 years. The ceremonial officer announced, "Let's welcome the tribe's emissary, the Darkspear Trolls leader, Wajin." Wajin came in, one hand on his chest, and bowed to the Alliance's leader, Magni, and the commander, Duque. "I bring greetings from the tribe's chief, Sar." At the same time, as comrades who once fought side by side against the evil Burning Legion, the chief hopes that we can solve the dispute over the wood in a peaceful way now that the Night Elves have announced their participation in the Alliance. Sar had sent the wisest Wajin, and not some beast man who only had muscles left in his brain. He had good intentions in the first place. Of course, only Dooku and the other leaders who were wise enough to understand the tribe could see this. If we can get along, we are brothers. If we can't, we are strangers. The dwarves have never been afraid of anyone who dares to use force, Magni said with a heroic look. If anyone thought that the dwarf king was a fool, they would definitely be tricked to death. Because his next words were, "Duque, I don't know the situation there, so I'll leave it to you." Tyrant also spoke at the right time. "Since the Night Elves have officially joined the Alliance, I believe the Alliance will give us a solution that will satisfy both sides." Duque raised his eyebrows. "All right, first of all, does the Night Elves agree to let the tribe enter Grey Valley to cut wood?" Tyrant shook her head. "Apologies, trees are not just a simple resource for the Night Elves. Most of the trees in Grey Valley are old. When the oak trees and other ancient trees are old enough, they can develop intelligence and evolve into ancient trees of life, ancient trees of wisdom, or ancient trees of war. They are the symbiotic partners of our people, and also our weapons. We cannot allow the tribe to enter our territory and cut wood." Wajin suddenly felt bitter in his mouth. "You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.